welcome to episode 93 of the Curling Legends podcast. My guest today is Toby McDonald. If you're in your car or listening on your phone, a reminder that you can go to thecurlingnews.com and follow along with some additional graphics and photographs while you're listening to this episode. While you're there, you can also check out some of our earlier podcasts and also read up on all the latest curling news from thecurlingnews.com. Toby McDonald grew up in St. John's, Newfoundland. He recently passed away on January 24th, just a few weeks before I'm recording this. I was able to speak with Toby about 2 years ago at the Brier in Lethbridge, Alberta. We sat down for a couple of hours and had a wonderful conversation. Toby was a very prominent figure within the Newfoundland and Labrador curling community. He was third for Jack MacDuff when the two of them, along with the front end of Doug Hudson and Ken Templeton, surprised many by winning the 1976 Brier. That was the first men's Canadian championship for Newfoundland. Four-time Brier champion and world champion Sam Richardson was the driver for Team MacDuff that week. And Toby will talk about the influence that he had and tell some stories from that experience, as well as the World Championship that took place a few weeks later. And we'll hear more about the evolution of curling in Newfoundland, the influence of Jeff Thomas within the community as well. We learn about the Brad Gushue rink, some of those early developments, a story with Russ Howard that took place following a junior championship. And then, of course, a deep dive into how Russ Howard, a few years later, joined Brad's team. And they went on to win the Canadian Olympic trials in 2005 and an Olympic gold medal in 2006. I did not really know Toby. We had spoken a couple of times, but this was a wonderful opportunity that I had to get to know him. And I hope that those who did know him and miss him will enjoy this talk. And I hope that others who never got a chance to meet him will get a bit of a glimpse into the person he was. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I'm sure you will as well. Here is my conversation with Toby McDonald. But if you go back to the 50s and 60s, probably the most words written are by Ken Watson.
Absolutely.
If you think about it.
That was the book. That was the Bible of the time.
But where did you originally grow up? Where were you born and raised?
I was born in St. John's, Newfoundland. That's where I still am today. And with the exception of 3 years when I was away to study in Fredericton at law school, I've been in Newfoundland. I've been known as a townie. Now, I don't really accept that I'm a townie because my dad came from St. Mary's Bay, and I like to think that I'm half Bayman, half townie. And
okay, so explain it to someone who's not knowledgeable. What does townie really mean then, or what is this supposed to?
Townie basically means that you came from the city of St. John's, and that was fairly well defined as just outside of St. John's, where the Trans-Canada Highway started. There was an overpass, so if you were inside the overpass, you were a townie, and if you're outside the overpass, you were a Bayman. I used to say to my son, I said, "What's the difference between a Bayman and a townie?" And I said, "Well, the difference between a Bayman and a townie, Mark, is that a Bayman knows how to do everything." And it's true. You know, it's like out here on the prairie. It's like if you're on your own farm and you have a problem, either you or your neighbor had best know how to get it fixed, because other than that, it was going to be a problem. And the same thing out around the bay in Newfoundland, in the fishing community. At the end of the year, when you're taking your boats up out of the water, it was a community effort. And so, that's why I say I'm serious about that, guys from out around the bay tend to be a lot better than townies are at taking care of business, you know?
Okay. So it's a little bit of poking fun, maybe a bit from one group to another.
Oh, it is. It's just fun now. At one point in time, it was a stigma almost. The Bayman would think that the townies were a stigma.
Yeah.
and vice versa. But now it's we're all just proud to be Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. It's like we've become a community of people that we definitely consider ourselves different from when you guys joined us in 1949.
Because I was going to say, when were you born, Toby?
I was born Canadian.
Okay.
I was born in 1949. I was born in 51. 49 was Confederation.
Yeah, very close then. But your parents obviously.
Oh yes, we were part of Dominion of Canada.
Yeah.
I mean, Dominion of Newfoundland, Dominion of Canada. It was a country, and people don't really get that concept. But we're all it's definitely we're a different group of people, and we're very proud of being outgoing and hardworking, and you'll find all sorts of hardworking. We're out here in Lethbridge now, and there's all sorts of hardworking Newfoundlanders out here taking advantage of the opportunities in the oil patch and such, and anywhere they need to go to make a good dollar. They're not just leaving home to make a poor dollar; they're leaving home to make a good dollar. But home is always home.
Had your parents actually curled? Well, tell me then, what was curling prior to Confederation? Was it on?
Oh my God, yes, curling was on.
Was it?
Curling had been.
What is the history of it?
Well, it was a fairly elitist sport at the outset. I mean, it was kind of like a country club environment, and either you were part of that country club set or not originally. That changed a long time ago. By the time that I started, I was in grade 8, and a buddy of mine, Marty Dalton, who I was just talking to last week, actually, we go back a long ways. He was going to go down to the curling club, and would I like to go? And my mom and my dad were doing it, and I was interested in pretty well anything that was on the go.
Oh, sorry, you said your mom and dad were?
Mom and dad were very social curlers.
Okay, so they were.
Yeah,
and the club was the
St. John's Curling, or the St. John's Newfoundland Curling Association, I think is what it was officially entitled. And it's been on the go for, oh my gracious me, I really don't know when it was actually incorporated, but a long time ago, back in the 30s.
Glass of water?
Yeah. Or maybe a jug of water would be good.
Yeah, a jug of water.
Jug of water.
Please.
That lady's paying for it.
Your mom?
Yeah, sure.
Anyway, it was the St. John's Curling Club. It was a wonderful 4-sheeter back in the day with, sand was the base, and Gordon Tilley was the ice maker, and Gordon Tilley was a wonderful ice maker of the time. He made the ice for the 1972 Brier, and when the first 50 came out, it was voted the best Brier ice. Back in those times.
Well, and Better Rocks, I heard too. We know that story, right? But from around that era, because we'll get to that. So you were grade 8, though. You said
I was in grade 8. Yeah.
But you had been to the club before. You'd
hung out
a little bit as a kid.
Not as much.
Like, was it a place where kids didn't go then necessarily back then? Like
one of the things that really was great about it is that when we got there, there was a schoolboy room. So that was on the side of the sheet, and you were not allowed out in the main part of the club. So U.S. schoolboys had to stay out in your own little room, which was fantastic because nobody ever came over. So we were kind of on our own, and we could have a game of poker with nickels and dimes and stuff like that.
What's the first opportunity then? Is it there's like a program to get into, or
no?
Is it
not really. One of the major influences is the fact that we could actually be in that schoolboy room. And it was your own. It was almost like a clubhouse to that extent. It wasn't mayhem or anything like that, but it was where a group of people could get together and get to know each other. And it was all male. There was no females in those days there. But it was our basic little kingdom, and then you would be allowed to play, and you'd play in the afternoons. So the setup then was all school-based. So I went to Brother Rice, say in grade 9, and so we were on the Brother Rice team, and Brother Rice had another team, and we played against Prince of Wales and all the different other city schools. So it was very much religion-based, too.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Because,
because at the time, everything was either Catholic or Protestant?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because at the time, I mean, I remember my dad telling me growing up in Ottawa back in for him it was in the 40s. Don't go play with the Protestant kids. You can't date a Protestant girl. That grandma's going to get angry at you for that sort of thing. Was it a little like that, or no? Most of that it probably tamed down.
Yeah, well, it was anyway. It was what it was in those days.
It was okay.
But
so for you, Toby, you went to it. So you were at.
I was Catholic. We were at Brother Rice. I should go back one little step. One of the major things that brought interest in curling at that stage, like any other times, is that national Pepsi schoolboy at that time was in St. John's in 1966, I think it was.
That was probably maybe the 5th or 6th one because they just started it, right? I think. Yeah.
And a team with a fellow by the name of Danny Herder. Danny was a top drawer skip at the time, and Ken Templeton, Alec Andrews, and Rob Hopkins. I can still remember the players. And Kenny, subsequently, we ended up going to the Brier again, and we were fortunate enough to win it. But at that stage, in 1966, we're all down at the stadium, like watching this remarkable event occur. And so it piqued a lot of interest. And so subsequently, in the next few years, there was a lot of teams from all the different schools. So it was very busy. It wasn't just a few teams. There was probably, I'm going to guess there was at least 20.
Was that one of the first big national events that you guys had in the
yeah, that and Sue Ann Bartlett being competitive, playing international Scottish, or at that time it was
Lassie?
the Lassie.
So was it hosted in?
It was hosted in Newfoundland.
Yeah, in which?
I don't know. Gosh, that date is going to be a little bit.
It was in the 60s.
It was in the late 60s, early 70s. And Sue Ann was very competitive.
But it was before that 72 Brier.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the Brier, the men's Brier was in 72, and that was just wonderful. That was full at that stage. Jack MacDuff was on our team then too, and that's kind of when I started to get to know Jack a little bit.
So that juniors, though, you played on in the playdowns to go to that?
No.
We weren't old enough yet.
I was just starting.
Yeah, just start. Okay.
So by grade 11 we beat that team. So by the time we were getting better each year. In grade 10 we had won what was called the Matchless Match, which was sponsored by a local paint manufacturing concern. But winning that meant that you were the sort of like the equivalent of the men's champ for junior boys. And then we won in 1968 and went away to the Brier. But not to Brier, to the Pepsi Junior.
Pepsi. So where was it hosted in 68?
That was at that time it was Port Arthur. But I'm kind of getting a little ahead of the game in terms of going back to the influences of St. John's Curling Club and Ballyhaley. The Ballyhaley Golf and Curling Club was also the other ice surface at the time. And there used to be inter-club competitions with them and with Bella Island, which is another curling club just on an island just off the coast there. It was like the first time that I was ever involved with something that was quasi-organized kind of thing. And the best part of it was we used to be in our little room there and we'd be watching the local curlers of the time sweep. At the time, George McCharles was one of the big names, and Lester Baring, who subsequently became my coach and lifelong friend. With Bob Cole, the duo that kind of kept them together. All those teams had a little commonality, and that was Ken Ellis and Alec Andrews. Alex, unfortunately, just recently passed away. God love him. They were the best two sweepers. They were generally acknowledged as the best two sweepers, and they stayed together. So as they stayed together, they could attract kind of the best thirds and skips to an extent. I mean, so other people have a different view of that, but it seemed to me a commonality that when the teams were going off to the Brier, at the front end for about 6 or 7 years was always going to be competing was Alec and Ken. I think they got the 4 Briers. So that schoolboy room became a place for me that like you're looking at the sheet from the side. And yesterday when I was at the Brier here, I was looking at the sheets from the side, so it kind of threw me back momentarily to that extent.
You mentioned Lester being kind of a coach, though, but did you have coaching though and initially?
No.
or just like how did you develop a slide? How did you just watch and observe and then
watching people on TV at that stage of the game, watching the Richardsons were always like back in like Jack MacDuff talks about, that he used to play Sam Richardson. He met him for the first time. He said, I've played you lots of times before when he was back in the host club, back in my home club, playing against the Richardsons was it. So, no, we didn't have very much in the way of anyone at that stage teaching you. You just kind of looked at the mainland guys that were really the names of the time. Pee Wee Pickering. I remember being down there, luckily not killing myself, doing the Pee Wee Pickering backswing on my best impression.
You're trying to do it? Yeah.
Oh, trying to do it. Oh, my God, yes.
I never thought of that. There must have been a ton of kids that probably did some damage back in the day.
I used to have that. I'm surprised I still have shoulders on me. I mean, I had that thing back so far. I think I was about to launch myself backwards out of the.
You're probably all of about 140 pounds soaking wet at the time. Maybe
I was 165 when we got to Brier, so yeah, that would be about right. Yeah. So the mainland players. I mean, they were the best players. I mean, but also locally. Like Ken and Alec as the sweepers, and Ken and Lester Baring, and in terms of the throwing and the rock, and there were a number of hopefully not going to offend people by not mentioning them, but there was a number of local players but Lester Baring was definitely one of my biggest influences.
Now, so did you play a bit of hockey or do other sports things in the summer?
Oh no, I was a total jock. I was on a bunch of teams in the school. I played volleyball, soccer. The biggest disappointment, of course, getting cut on the hockey team when I thought I was pretty good, which obviously I wasn't. And that was And anyway, I was playing volleyball and soccer and long distance running, table tennis, you name it. If there was a list to sign up for, I signed up for it. But in 1968, I ended up getting detached retinas in both my eyes. And so,
And how old are you then? Yeah, 17, I guess.
It was the same year that we had gone to our first national. So
yeah,
I ended up having two operations had to go to Toronto at that stage, and so I'm pretty well ended up mostly blind in my left. Oh, I was terrified.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I was naively terrified. But it ended my contact sports career, and in retrospect, that kind of forced me in towards curling as my maximum interest, and that turned out really, really good.
Yeah.
You never know what ill wind blows favorably.
I mean, I think many would say in this sport that it's not the most lucrative if you're thinking about the on ice, but the experience, the people you meet, engagement, curlers, curling fans, are just it's a community, and I imagine maybe it's helped you in your business life and in your.
Absolutely.
And also, I mean, like any sport, it builds confidence, it builds teamwork, it builds so many great skills for
friendships,
young and friendships. Yeah,
for sure, friendships. Yeah. I mean, in terms of our first team, we were friends. I mean, Marty Dalton and I still, like I say, we still regularly communicate, have a grand chat. We're on the line literally last week for about an hour.
Now, when did the surgery? This was before.
That was in 1968 after the surgery.
After the curling, then the season was sort of all done.
And then I had to go back up in the summertime to have the other eye done. And obviously, Dr. Michael Shea, who was a surgeon at that time up in Toronto, did a very good job because I have a clip in my left eye, and I lost most of the sight, but it's still good enough to be able to mostly see the room, or at least use.
You see one room. The key is you just want to see one. Yeah, you don't want to see two.
But that certainly kind of not forced me into, but curling was already a big interest of mine. I was really interested in it. And it was, at that time, the curling was pretty hot in St. John's.
That's what I was going to ask you then. So you're playing all these other sports. How did the non-curling community sort of take to the game? Was it a little bit on an oddity?
Definitely. Yeah. Oh, definitely. It was an odd thing. It was not accepted as being, other than the fact, of course, the Brier had been there and people turned out. Once
that came, it maybe in some of those events changed the minds a little bit.
It did, but it was still, in school, when you were in school, signing up for curling would not have been near so interesting for most people as signing up for any other sport, really.
I know I'm going a little bit backwards, but I got to know. So there's only a couple clubs, so that you didn't have a Catholic club and a Protestant club.
No.
So you must have had to, you wouldn't have all the draws at the same time, then you'd have to.
No.
Wasn't any roughhousing going on between the different.
No, there was good friendly competitions. Okay. I always remember between the various clubs, and at that time there was good competitive clubs all the way across Newfoundland. Cornerbrook was very busy and viable, and
so how many sheets would there be then in
the total province at that stage of the game? I've never tallied it up, but I'm going to say no more than 25 sheets probably. You had sheets up in Lab City and Goose Bay.
But the sport had existed, like you say, prior to Confederation. It had been the Ironstones. That was always Quebec, though, right? I think, or did Newfoundland?
We never had any of that.
Yeah,
we did have it to the extent where people had their own stones.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
That was down in the old Princess Rink, I think, is what it was called years ago. But the St. John's Curling Club coincidentally moved from the old facility to the new facility, the present St. John's Curling Club, the same year that we had won the Brier. So that worked out pretty good in terms of the number of people. I was a curling captain at that point that year, and I remember the following year after the Brier, there was more people upset with me, I think, than there was happy with me by virtue of the fact that we had to run literally draws at 6 and 8 and 10.
Oh, just to get all the people in.
Yeah, just to get all the people in. And, of course, I was in charge of scheduling, and every now and then you schedule somebody for 2 10 o'clock games in a row. I would not have been a very popular man. I only did that for a couple of years. Right. That was enough of that.
Let's take the path then how you got there, because it's a short number of years, and you're Canadian juniors in '68. Yep. You have this kind of scary situation with your eyesight and dealing with that, and then you're coming into another season. Now, are you still a junior the next season, or are you?
I came up the first year that I came up from junior. Well, no, we won the Canada Games. We went to the Canada Games in 1971 again with Marty Dalton.
Okay, so you're pretty young in '68 because you're
We were like in grade 11 then, so that would have been 68. So we would have been 16 and 17. I
forgot to ask how you wrapped up at that.
Oh, 2 and 8.
What's that?
2 and 8.
2 and 8. Yeah.
2 and 8.
Yeah. And was it a real kind of eye opener?
Oh my goodness, yes. Well, first of all, at that stage of the game, I wasn't using a slider.
Oh yeah.
You weren't sliding over the hog line in those days. You weren't allowed to slide over the hog line.
Yeah.
People don't know that.
I remember that. Yeah, you had to stop. Right? Yeah. But you didn't have to worry about getting over because you weren't even.
Well, I was trying to get as close to it as I could with a pair of boots on.
Yeah.
Because at the time, believe it or not, honest to God, it was deemed to be unsafe for young kids to have sliders on.
Okay, so the adults can have it, but in
but there wasn't much in the way of sliders then. It was basically take off your left shoe and use your patent leather shoe. Not many people even had proper curling shoes. The Bauer shoe was kind of like the first, just coming onto the scene around that kind of time. Yeah. So my first national I went to with the best thing I can call was the equivalent of a pair of slippery boots. And that's how I was trying to get to the hog line. By 71, I was, why I have my warped delivery.
Yeah.
What did you take of that?
So what any other things you remember about that nationals then and that junior nationals, or that you took away, or anything else that just seemed to?
Oh my goodness gracious! Just to be in a national competition in a different province, getting on a plane for the second time, and being treated so well. I mean, we were at that time. That was before Thunder Bay. That was Port Arthur and Fort William and Port Arthur.
Fort William,
I still have the curling pins from then, and just treated like royalty. I mean, the curling was really big in Thunder Bay long before it became Thunder Bay.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, and they had we had cheerleaders. Every team had its own cheerleading section, and those cheerleaders were kind enough to entertain us afterwards. In terms, we were pretty innocent little boys. Now, I don't mean entertained like that.
Yeah. Okay, I got you. But still, but for young lads, it was a lot of fun and
for young lads to have a team of cheerleaders cheering for them. Are you kidding? I mean, it was like, wow, where are we? What planet is this?
Yeah.
Anyway, so then just sort of jumping forward, then we went to the Canada Games, and for me that was a real telling thing, Kevin. We had a good team. Marty Dalton was skipping. I was third. Joe Power was playing lead for us. Joe was all about 130 pounds at that stage of the game, and Kenny Templeton was our second. And we finished 3-3. We're in Saskatoon, and all the curling community in Saskatoon then took us aside. Everybody else was staying inside tents, inside of arenas and things like that, which was fabulous for their purposes. We were in our own section where we were in two, like I think it was a community college, and we all had individual rooms. Well, two in a room around a circular area with a central area, where then you could communicate with the other teams in between games and such. And we finished 3-3. And the 3 games we lost on last shot. We were tied up coming home in all of them, and we lost on last shot. And that was the first time that really, in terms of me, it was like, okay, we could win this. We could have won that. And so the seed was planted very early from my perspective that, we were competitive and it could be. And then came back from that, finished up at one of my first senior gigs at that time was with Bob Cole. Bob was defending Newfoundland champion. Lester Baring, his third, had blown out his knee at the Brier the prior year. Okay. Alec and Ken Ellis, the guys I was telling you about, the good sweepers, were on his front end. And Bob, who obviously everyone knows Bob Cole, Bob was a fierce competitor. And he came to me and he asked me if I had any plans for the following year.
This is just as you're kind of heading into your first year,
just going into it. And Lester was still on the mend, and he asked me to hang loose. And unfortunately, it turned out that really that knee injury to Lester really ended his career. He never did come back. So I ended up as a wet behind the ears young fella playing curling with Bob Cole.
And that was the year of the Brier?
Or that was coming up in, that was, excuse me, I got the dates a little bit wrong there. I said 75. No, 75. 75, the Brier was in Fredericton, and I was in law school. So I saw the whole Brier in Fredericton.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I missed a few classes that week. So it was prior to that. So it would have been
before you went
72.
To school. Okay.
Around there.
Well, yeah, because the year was
72 it was.
The year was in Newfoundland. Who was Team Newfoundland then? Because Bob didn't
Fred Durant was the skip, and the third was Jack MacDuff, Bob Rowe, and Carl Strong.
Okay. So you had started playing that year then in men's then? Or you were? Yeah. So you had,
Carl Strong, ultimately, his two daughters were wonderful curlers for Newfoundland over the course of time, Heather and of course, Jack. And Bob Rowe was a really good friend of mine, a long-time friend since, and he represented Newfoundland a couple of years later out of Labrador. They competed well. They was really interesting. That was Oris Melischuk's Brier.
I'm assuming you went to it. Or did you even?
Oh yeah, I attended everything there. Dave Romano was like a hero to me.
Oh yeah,
he was the third for. I got to meet him like all the kids here now getting to meet the Brier Clares now, and got to meet Dave Romano and got his autograph and still have it probably.
So you've reached men's at that point. I would have thought you would, or that would have been maybe, yeah. So, but you're still young and you're watching this level of play. What else do you recall then from that event or that week just watching?
Oh, it just made me want to be there. I wanted like any curler wanted to have a Purple Heart at that time.
Yeah.
That was your goal. It wasn't to win the Brier, at least initially. The desire was to actually proudly have that Purple Heart on your chest. That when somebody at that stage, when you're in play, people wore their jackets, and on their jackets would be their Purple Hearts, their badges of honor. So you'd walk out on the ice and you were playing a team, and they had their hearts on. They wore them, and you knew you were in for a game. But it also meant that you were up for that challenge.
Yeah.
So then we went to law school in 72. I found that in 72 I played. And
so you played in New Brunswick for a few years while you were there?
Yeah, I played in New Brunswick, but not really because I wasn't that smart a guy that I could both curl and study.
I'm assuming there's a lot of study involved. Yeah, it's
yeah. My results after my first year of law school were such that I determined perhaps I shouldn't play my second year.
Okay, yeah.
So I didn't. I ended up in the semi-final with Mike Flannery for the province because of it. I'm not sure. I sometimes get the years mixed up a little bit. But yeah, I did not curl. I practiced. So I was a member of the Capital Winter Club, and I didn't curl that second year. I just threw rocks. The first year I played with fellow Don Kelly, who was a local gentleman, and we ended up winning a bonspiel in Oromocto and such. And when I got back to law school second year, I had already determined, having seen my marks, that I wasn't going to be curling seriously. And Dave Sullivan had given me a call and asked me if I was interested in playing with him. Dave Sullivan was the Sullivans, and I just couldn't do it. And
really, so you hit the clays.
It was hard, but I just really I was determined to get my education, and that was just reality at the time. Subsequently, we did enter the New Brunswick Junior Championship the following year. It was like no, that would have been the first year I was there.
First year you were there.
So they had the concept of the junior. It was 8 years experience and less.
Okay.
So I was skipping the team at the university, trying to win the university championships with three guys that I'd met, but we didn't do very well. There was another team there that had three guys whose skip hadn't apparently done very well. Yeah. So after that was over, they asked me if I'd be interested in going into this junior bonspiel in New Brunswick, and I said, sure, let's go. And off we went, and Peter Cooper, Wayne Wood, and David Day, and don't we win it?
You remember what you won?
It was there was not a big money amount or anything along those lines, but we won the praise and adulation of all the other people that were in it. And it was totally unexpected. And it was, as I say, I guess that was where Dave might have seen that I could sweep. I could sweep pretty good in those days but I think, again, when going forward in time, never did run into David again, but I ran into Peter out in Kamloops when we were subsequently at the Olympic trials. And Wayne Wood was, he and I communicated, he's working with the university in Quebec. So it's interesting in terms of this interview, the number of people who you still connect to.
I think it's impressive, Toby. I do a lot of these. You remember everyone's name. I know you felt a little tricky there on a couple, but you're already in the top 5% of everybody I interview. It's with your memory. You're doing great.
Yeah, I suppose that's reality, isn't it? So I came back from law school.
You got the degree, right?
I got the degree.
Okay, that was the point. That was
good. That was the purpose.
That was the purpose.
You're away for 3 years being lonely, although my wife.
But there was never a question of going back home, though, right?
Oh, never.
Always,
No, I was always wanting to go back home. And when I got back home, of course, it was 3 years when the curling was on the go, and I wasn't there. And I didn't know Jack that well. I knew Jack a bit, and we had gotten along really well when we got together.
Because he was originally from Nova Scotia.
Yeah, Jack was playing he was in Lunenburg, and I think he was with Acadia, and he was playing in the Atlantic University Curling Championships. And Fred Durant, who was at that time looking to try to get stronger players, convinced him to switch over and come to Memorial University and then play with Fred.
Which is fascinating, right? Like making a life decision. I mean, we see it now all the time. I mean, Ryan Fry came out and moved to Newfoundland, right? So
he
was living there, right? He was living there, right? He was living there.
Yes.
Just to make
he was
sure.
manager of Ballyhaley, actually. Not manager, but he was assistant.
Yeah. So I mean, it's so but that so that would happen even back then potentially, right? Somebody might say, "Oh, I think I'm gonna pursue the curling dream." But had you played him or met him before he made it to Newfoundland?
Oh yeah, not before I came to Newfoundland. No, I never met him. But Jack was always a nice, gregarious, outgoing fellow, and really always positive person.
Are you the same then, Toby, or are you, him more so than you? What do you think? Is it just?
Oh, Jack MacDuff is one of the heroes of my life.
Oh yeah,
he and I talk every week, not every week, every 2 weeks.
Yeah, still, that's great. Yeah,
and he's still positive, notwithstanding the realities that he's going through.
So, is there a memory of meeting him the first time then, or do you have any? No, not really.
No, the actual first time meeting him, I don't know. I do not. But when I got back, of course, I didn't have a team. I wasn't curling with anyone. I was, really wanting to. But I came back and I had the article, and we got married, and Shelley and I, and Shelley was a good player. I kind of skipped over one that I wouldn't mind doing for you, Kevin, which was a funny thing. I was saying that Memorial had a very active university curling team, social, not just competitive. And to the point that it was like it had a board, and I ended up, once I got in the university, I became president of Mun Curling. And part of Mun Curling then was you were president of it, and you had to run it, and you're in charge of it. And we had 24 mixed teams.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So we would have 2 draws at the Ballyhaley on the weekend, and you had to put the teams together, you had to schedule them, and all of that. But it was really funny because I kind of became the matchmaker. Okay. I'm president. I'm doing the scheduling. I'm putting the teams together, and I get a phone call from so and so. Would you mind, put me on the team with so and so? It had nothing to do with success at curling,
with curling talent. Yeah.
So anyway, it was really funny in the course of doing this, and I'm putting a schedule together. I get a phone call from a fellow by the name of Brian Walsh, and really nice guy who I subsequently lifelong friends. He was the president or the referee for the Newfoundland and Labrador Soccer Association. So he ran all the referees over time for years. Great guy. So he phones me up and he said, Toby, I said, yeah. I said, Brian, I said, how you doing, Brian? He said, well, you can do me a favor. And I said, what's that? He said, that one, Shelley Keogh, he said, can you put her on my team? And I said, Brian, I'm sorry, Brian, I can't.
Yeah.
He said, what do you mean you can't? I said, she's already on mine. So that's how my wife and I ultimately
okay.
We married.
I was thinking as you started telling the story, I said because I had a 24 mixed team. So how many couples went on after that? It must
coincidentally, unfortunately, my first wife Shelley passed away, and subsequently I remarried, and my current wife Noreen. I'm twice blessed with my realities there. We're down in Florida. She's very active, keeping herself in shape and such. She's over doing a bike, one of those
Peloton things. Yeah.
Over at the local gym there, and she meets this lady from Newfoundland, and the lady from Newfoundland was Barb Galway, who I had put on the team with Wade, who I met subsequently.
And they're down, and
they were
connected
living
in Florida. Oh yeah,
they're living in Ontario now. But so the couple from Mun Curling,
so you were the matchmaker. Yeah,
I was the matchmaker on
for
that
yourself.
Well, I'm sure a number of the others, like Paul and Mar, are good friends of mine. Yeah. But anyway, I do go on, don't I?
So you've got to form a team, or you're back home, and the Purple Heart is still.
I kind of got conscripted. That's what I could say, because I was totally unattached, and in the meantime, Kenny Templeton, Kenny and I literally talking last week. Ken's a great guy. He's a lawyer as well, and we were actually working on some stuff together lately. And Doug Hudson, Doug had already been to the Brier with Fred White 2 or 3 years previous. He was the old veteran on our team. I think he was all of like 32, I think. They were looking for, and Jack had gotten together, and they were looking to get somebody else. And so Kenny, because we had been to the schoolboy together and to the Canada Games together, kind of convinced Jack that maybe I might be a fit. And
But it was kind of a new team then.
Brand new team.
Brand new team. And that was a 70...
That was 76.
70, 74, 75, 76 season, I guess, right?
Yep,
yeah.
That's correct.
So that's how you found magic in a bottle.
That's it.
Is it? Yeah.
And we weren't any more impressive than any of the number of teams at the beginning of the year. That year, there would have been at least a half dozen teams that were as good as us or better, and we were just gelling together. But we ended up, we were playing, half reasonable before we got to into the competition. It was a long competition. If you were in St. John's Curling Club, you was tough to get out of the club. It was tough to get out of the club. You had to play. There was a zone competition, and there was 4 zones, and each of the zones got 4 positions. It's a double knockout event, and the 4 positions were the eastern zone. So Ballyhaley and Bellalman were in that, and subsequently St. Lawrence. To get to be the St. John's representatives of the St. John's Club, you were beating up on each other. And
I guess too, when it's a double knockout, it's tricky, right? You just have one. I've heard stories of you just get that one early loss, and next thing you know, do you recall how things went then through the?
Yeah, we gelled. So we were out in Stephenville on Stephenville ice, and Gordon Tilley was making our ice at St. John's Club, and that was running at those times back in the day when you were timing, and you were hoping to get a rock that was hog line to T line. It was 21 seconds. So that was 21 seconds, 21 and a half seconds. Gordon Tilley ice. That was good ice. That nowadays people wouldn't view it that way, but it was really, really good ice. But we went out to.
I remember like growing up as a junior at the Assiniboine, it would start out. It'd be less than 20 on the first stand.
Yeah,
you had to break it down just to get to 2021.
Yeah. So I think we were better than any of the other teams at figuring out Stephenville ice, because when we got there, first and second in, it was our light takeout for draw. So I don't know what kind of a number you throw on that now at this stage of the game. We'll probably be in 9.5, hogline to hogline kind of. That was your draw weight. And then by the time the third end came down, it was more like St. John's ice, 21 seconds. We were pretty handy with that. And we were a good hitting team, and we had a great sweeping team. Kenny was a great sweeper, and Dougie was a very consistent player, nice guy. And our senior statesman kind of, even though he was only a few years older than us. Of course, then off we go to the Brier with that Purple Heart on your chest, my gracious me.
Well, just getting it that final game, was there a finals for it, or was it more?
Yeah, no, there was a final, double knockout, but we won relatively handily.
Okay, so there wasn't.
Yeah. And the next thing your dream is realized, and off you're going, and
now, so just the party winning, because we all know that Newfoundland likes to celebrate. Was just the party winning the Purple Heart must have been pretty good.
Really, it didn't take much to have the party.
So it was no different than any other Friday or Saturday night.
Oh no! Well, we had to get back from Stephenville, though, But yeah, so Stephenville has always held a special place in our heart.
Like, what's the time frame then between that and you got to make it to?
I don't remember the exact time frame. It wasn't that long. I was just a new lawyer at the time. I just finished articling. We'd just gotten married. We just got a new house.
Now, Jack had been already though, right, to the Brier, because he'd been there, so he kind of knew. Yeah, and they knew what to expect.
And Kenny and I hadn't, but we never knew what was to come, because when we got off the plane and we got there, I mean, that's a whole new chapter. I was going to say, I got to go back one year in terms of the sequence of events and interests and things in my life. It was back the year before, so in 70. John Clark was the representative of New Brunswick that year, attending that Brier and meeting all of those guys.
That was Bill Tetley. That was the one that he won.
And the Reed boys were there out of Alberta. They were all young. So again, that was inspirational, seeing that team out there, that young Reed team from Alberta. They were top drawer.
You're watching that 75 Brier. Did you, at that time, as you'd taken a few years away, you'd been working on your degree, Did you think you could?
I was biting
measure
at the
up.
bit.
Yeah,
I was biting at the bit. Yeah, I wished I was out there. I really did. I mean, I knew all the guys that were out there. I mean, at that time, Bob Cole was our representative in '75, and he ended up playing in the final against Bill Tetley, who Rick Lang was playing third with. It was a game. It wasn't back in the day. Then that wasn't the final game, but it was the final game of the round robin, and Bill Tetley happened to be playing Bob Cole. And Bob Cole being televised nationally, and they gave him a game. Like, even though Bob's record wasn't that good, Bob wouldn't give you an inch in a game of tiddlywinks, and so to be out and playing, Bob was going to be, you had no question whether Bob Cole was going to be trying to win that game. And they did play very, very well, and Tetley ultimately won, but it It was great to see Newfoundland out there on the ice, to tell you the truth. And we were there, my wife and I, my fiance, was my fiance then, Shelley. We were there in the stands with our Newfoundland flag waving and being the proud spectators, like all of our team is here now at Lethbridge.
Be hard to believe then that a year later where you'd be, right? Like you probably weren't expecting it to. I mean, you had that desire, that dream, but from where you were in 75 to think it was a year later, just a year later, right?
Yeah. Didn't think.
So heading to it, did you know what to expect? Did Jack talk about just as we're heading out there? What
no, we were focused. Again, you're talking about an era of time when we really didn't have much in the way of coaching. Lester Boring became our coach and mentor, and always has been. He's been my coach and mentor for my life.
But you don't have a coach in 76 coming with you. There's not a
no.
And in that case, it's sort of the skip. In a lot of cases, acts as coach. But Jack was a young skip too, though, right?
Yes.
Yeah, in a way. Yeah.
Yeah, we got along really, really well, and we did have goals set that we wanted. We felt that we were as good as any Newfoundland team that had ever gone, and that our goal was certainly to do better than any other Newfoundland team.
Now, does Sam Richardson pick you up at the airport?
Yes.
Now, had you met Sam before or seen him before? No.
Only in my, watching him on TV,
So what was that first?
Oh, I remember an awful lot about first. You talk about you only get one chance to make a first impression. Sam certainly overwhelmed us all, but not in any kind of a intentional way. He just was such a normal presence that you couldn't help but say, gee, who is the, wow. He really knows a lot about stuff, and he wasn't pretentious or anything along those lines. He was just naturally gifted with relation to coaching and or helping. I can't even call it coaching. He was sort of a driver. The only reason he was our driver, the story goes, was that he wanted to drive Bernie Sparks, and I don't remember who the host chairman was at the time, and basically told him that forget that, you've won enough already. We're giving you Newfoundland.
And that's really
true.
Okay. Yeah.
So anyway, that's how we ended up with Sam.
So you want to hear a funny Bernie story? He talked about 76. He said, I'd been to those Briers and I told all my team, and none of them had been, you're going to play on this really tough ice and it's going to be slow and it's going to swing with the chaff and all this. So we're going to practice. And they found clubs that they could go practice at that had slow and all this. It was the straightest and fastest I'd ever seen. And he said it did. It took us a while to figure out what the heck we were doing. But Don Lewis did the ice in 76. It was quick. I imagine for you guys then, we just talked about some of the ice conditions.
It was quick.
You had to pick up on it, I'm assuming. It was
quick. Yeah. It was straight. We were all good hitters, so that kind of suited our play. But Sam was the major influence in relation to our opportunity for success, and we didn't know that at the time. Didn't even know the man. Didn't even know Sam himself so much as knew the Richardson legend and Ernie. And Ernie, even then, was that classy statesman-like person that he always has been and remains to this day.
And he was there at the event. He was at the event. Probably.
Oh my God, we met him. Sure, this is Sam's brother.
Yeah.
So he was. We're with Roy.
So did he adopt you as well? Did the whole Richardson clan sort of adopt you throughout the week? Or
I can't say that was the case. They were certainly friendly with us when we saw them. But
I thought they'd be cheering for Team Saskatchewan initially.
Well, Roger Anholt was obviously the Saskatchewan team was very popular. But no, with Sam, literally what happened on the way we were planning on sleeping with our wives. You were young and frisky too then, those.
Yeah.
But you were curly. And by the time between when we left the airport and we got to the accommodations, we were dealing with things, getting our minds set and doing things the Richardson way.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Which meant
Richardson's way was that Nate and the skip slept together, and the lead and the second slept together, and you talked curling and you slept curling, and that's what you did.
Okay.
And that's what we did.
So the wives got sent to other rooms, and
the wives, our change in relation to what we were doing, we were going to approach this a little different.
How'd that go over then?
No issue.
It was okay.
No issue. No issue. It really wasn't, and they were all very supportive. I mean, we were all young, and this was fascinating, and we were achieving our goal of even getting there. But yeah, so then Sam It just was basically subsequent to that. We had the usual scene. We got there, it was pretty exciting. We were there an extra day early, and meeting all these people. And I met Laurie Artis, who was the chairman of the event at that stage, and Don, in terms of the ice maker. It was brand new to me, having a look at things, seeing how things work and everything. So this was pretty exciting. And of course, there was a big party in our room, and we were meeting all these new people, and it was wonderful. And one of the people that we met was Mike Flannery, which I have to go back. I keep going back in time, the year before. I can't say it was exactly the year before or the year before that. Mike Flannery ended up not being able to. They had qualified through an event in New Brunswick, which was you had 8 teams or 12 teams that had qualified, and you have an open event at the end where you got the final 4 teams. They had qualified for the provincials. One of their players was on the swim team, fell on the deck, couldn't play. Rule of competition were nobody who had played at any level of competition in New Brunswick at that point in time ever could fill in. I hadn't, because I was in law school, and I couldn't afford. I'm going to flunk out here, And anyway, I said, Mike phoned me up, I'd play. And I said, no, I can't, Mike, I can't. I mean, I told him no, I don't know how many times. Eventually, I said the words, well, I won't leave you stuck. And about a week later, I get the phone call saying, will you come? So off I go to the New Brunswick. This is in my second year law school job. Yeah. I'm in the provincial New Brunswick championships, playing third stone, using corn brooms, not having swept all year. You wanted to see a pair of hands at the end of it.
The calluses hadn't built up.
Oh, no calluses. I mean, I was meat. I was raw meat. My hands were. Anyway, we end up losing the game at the early part of it, and then we win, and we win, and we win, and we win. And the next thing, we're in the semi-final against John Clark. And when we lost to John, with Sheldon Falk and those guys, I was about the only one on the team that was happy, because I could not have gone to the Brier. I literally could not have taken a week.
Because of the time, Which probably would have devastated you, maybe more, the fact that you would have won and then to not go would have been nice to have a Purple Harp and feel... it
would have been the Ganong symbol, the Ganong Cup, I think it was called at that time.
Oh, okay.
They didn't have the Purple Harp. Still symbolism, though. But anyway, it turns out, who comes up to our room at the Brier in 1976 but Mike Flannery, having just won the right to be there with New Brunswick, still wearing the same old pair of shoes that he had worn with me, where they flapped, like the sole was disconnected from the upper. Mike would go up, and he had it held together. But Mike was a good player, and anyway, so it was really nice. We both got to the Brier.
So how does the week progress then? Does
the next day there was nobody in our room. The night before there was everybody in our room. The next night nobody was in our room, and basically all that had happened was that Sam had told everyone to go away and don't show up till the thing was over, and that was it.
So you think just that alone might have been the difference, which is we kept the partying down to a minimum. Maybe wait till we win it.
Absolutely.
Celebrate too much. Okay.
Sam was absolutely fantastic.
So that wasn't your team's behavior. Probably you would have had a few more cocktails or some more.
Yeah, we wouldn't have been. I never found alcohol to be a performance enhancer, shall we say? No,
generally not. Yeah.
It's
a rare breed that's been able to, Al Hackner and Hector Vade maybe being the exception.
I know another. Won't mention his name. But the fact that we were not into the party mode, we were down to business, and then we go out and we had our goals, and Sam was our man, and he was bringing us everywhere we went, and my goodness gracious, sure, everywhere we went, everyone, who's that with Sam?
Well, and part of it, I guess, is as the week goes on, was a buzz starting to form? Was the media starting to get attention?
We went out and won our first 2 games. Well, already that's like...
That had never... Yeah.
Then the second day we went and lost our next 2 games, so that's just Newfoundland. So Newfoundland's back where they would ordinarily be. So we were 2-2, and at the time Alberta was in Sokolowski was in first place, and there was a lot of good teams. Bernie was there, and Rick Lang was there skipping. I mean, there was a lot of good squads there, and of course the Blonde brothers were really strong.
Oh, actually, I have to ask you about that because they changed the rules to 10 ends the next year. Were you? There was a draw, I understand, where they couldn't even. One game went 5 hours, or they had trouble getting games. Do you recall this?
Yeah.
They had to delay the next draw because no time clocks.
Yeah.
And I grew up in Manitoba, and I played against Clare a few times. he's the reason they created. He might be the reason they created a time clock, because Claire would sit there in the hack and grab his watch and grab his eyeglasses and grab his watch and touch his broom and grab his glasses.
We had there was a gentleman who was playing in our club at St. John's Club who was similarly slow to make decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So
thoughtful.
It was thoughtful.
Very
yes.
thoughtful.
So we had been we're used to that. That wasn't a big issue, and I don't remember that being an issue playing
really at the time. Yeah.
The truth,
well, in the game there were no clocks, so you just sort of you knew how the pace of the game, and sometimes it was like a golf round. Sometimes
until you mentioned it just then, I would not have even recalled that they were slow to play. No, it wasn't a factor. But Sam was a huge factor in everything that we did. And
now, of course, it wasn't coaching, so he's not coming on the ice, but was he before games and after games?
Through it all, his presence, his ability.
And he would watch all.
We didn't even know what a corner guard was. When we went out
yeah.
So he was, he had a bit of a work ahead of him. So just explaining it, the corner guard was the new strategy at that stage of the game, and just different things, just his presence, just his goal setting, just the way that it was. As I've often said it, somewhere along the line over the course of time, somebody asked me a question about Sam, and I said, Sam Richardson was that good a coach that you didn't even realize you were being coached. And that's what it was to me.
Was there a moment that week then? I mean, you go in thinking we can win this, but there's probably something in the back of your mind going, well, but Newfoundland doesn't win this, right? That just doesn't happen. But was there a moment where and I don't know, maybe you had that belief all along, but as a team, was there a moment where it clicked, where there was, we win this thing? Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe you guys had that belief all along, but I would just imagine it would be, you've got to reach it at some point, either before you get there or while you're there.
We may have been one of the earlier proponents of what I'm dealing with now in terms of talking to the guys that I'm dealing with right now, and that it was literally go out and make 8 rocks. And we were very supportive of each other, so that if Kenny missed a stone, Kenny, my second, and Doug had a good sense of humor too, and so that kept us loose there. Jack was just a good shot maker. Jack was on stage. He liked the stage, and he was very good at it. Even in his when we won, even his closing comments where he invited everybody to come back down to come home here in Newfoundland. He was really good. Jack was just an outstanding player. I would not have considered myself in the classification of Jack as a player. I'm a competitor. I'm a very keen competitor. I've learned how to be nice now over the course of time, but at one point, I would not have. I didn't want to lose. Let's just say that, and I was so competitive that I would go and I'd throw up before a game. I would, I was like Gump Worsley in hockey. I would be so intense in terms of my desire that I would literally throw up. It got to the point that when I didn't throw up, I was wondering whether I was going to curl that well, because I knew if I threw up, I was going to curl well. Over the years, that's obviously dissipated, but we never ever really sat down and said our goal was to win the Brier. Like, we didn't say, okay, we're going to win the Brier this year, boys. Our goal, when we initiated it as a team, was to do better than Newfoundland had ever done before. That happened by the 7th or 8th game, and then Sam was just keeping us loose and focused and relaxed. And I remember distinctly one thing that really, about that point in the competition, that we're walking down in the hotel, and Sam and I are walking next to each other, just two of us walking along, and he put his left arm around my shoulder and he gave me a hug and he said, "You remind me of me, Toby boy." And I'm tearing up here now.
Yeah. I think it's hard for probably anyone, even for me, because I didn't grow up in that sense, but the Richardsons were the Furby Four of their era, but even more so, like they were larger than life in that kind of, as the game was really hitting the limelight, right? And TV was now around, and this was a different. It was kind of one of the early, you can go back to sort of some of the earlier boom of curling, but that's a new boom, right? That they sort of were there, and then they were there every year, and they won, and so for them to give you that support must have been really kind of just give you a bolt of energy.
Absolutely. He, I don't know how much time you got. I seem to be going on here, but
Toby, Matt Baldwin was over 3 hours. Marilyn Bodo was over 3 hours. You take as long as you want. You may have to go somewhere. I'm feeling it.
No, I don't have to go anywhere. We have no. The next function we have is at around 3 o'clock. We're going to go over and watch some curling. So we have lots.
It's only quarter after 11. You got lots of time. Yeah.
Partway through the week was the. I want to say it was Wednesday night or Thursday night. Was the night of the big banquet. And
it's fine because the round robin wraps up on Friday.
Yeah,
right?
I'm just trying to remember when there was no round robin then, right? It was only the round robin.
Only the round robin, yeah. And
so it was midweek. It was the banquet, the Brier banquet.
But it's midweek. It's not at the end or at the beginning.
Yeah.
It's sort of right. Dab in the.
It was like you took a night off, kind of thing. It was McDonald Brier then, right? And John Diefenbaker was the speaker, and of course everyone was looking forward to that. You know, I mean, at the time, he was. Between Lester Pearson and John Diefenbaker, they were the Canadian names, in politics. And Tommy Douglas, of course. But he was going to be the speaker, and doesn't he end up having a medical issue? And he is not. We all show up to the banquet all dressed up in our nice camel hair at the time. Jack is thinking we were looking spiffy. And Sam, of course, picks us up, and he's got a tux on. And what's going on, Sam? Oh, he's a little speech here, boys. And next thing, they introduced Sam. I mean, he didn't make the big deal of it or anything. Next thing, he gets up from the table where he was sitting with us and walks up to the front. And now he's the guest speaker. And, 45 minutes later, as we pick ourselves up off the floor, because we haven't stopped laughing. I mean, the tears, Sam was just, he captured the whole room like he could do. And it was hilarious. And he was telling all these stories. And he was weaving us into some of those stories.
Oh, really? And
just in little ways, And
so he was calling out a little bit to the boys from Newfoundland. He was driving around.
There's no question that we were, because of Sam.
Yeah.
People were.
And at that point, midweek,
our record was pretty good.
You were in the mix.
5-2 or something like that. Big one was when we beat Wayne Sokolowski, and they were undefeated at the time, and we.
So that might have been one of those moments that really that win in that game that. At least mathematically, at least anyway, right? Because
there was a couple.
Because if somebody's undefeated, and you don't beat them, you're in. Yeah. It's tricky, right?
Yeah, and beating Jimmy Ursel too. That was huge. And Jack made a great shot in that game. That nowadays it would be an average shot like Kevin Cooley would think. Well, I'll have to make 2 of those in this game. In those days, you weren't playing those angle raised 45-degree angle, 15, 20-foot runs. But that's what Jim Ursel had forced us into, and we were standing up, myself and Jack, trying to decide what it is we're going to do here. You could not get in there with an in-turn draw. It just was run dead straight. And Kenny came down the ice and suggested this angle raise. Boy, we're not doing it this way, so we decided to give it a go. And Jack makes it, doubles Jimmy's toolbox out, and it was like the place erupts because it was such a different shot of the time. Called and played, and people say, "Oh, it was a fluke." No, it wasn't. It was what you do nowadays, and. We just did.
Now you set up the whole end for it.
Yeah, nowadays we should have said, okay, no, we're not going to hit a fat half or a small half. We're going to hit 3/8 here, right? Anyway, I'm trying to get the boys to do that. Anyway, there you go. So those moments came along there like that, but through it all, the major thing was our starting to get belief in ourselves, and in large measure that was because of Sam. But also the outpouring of, at that time, it was telegrams from home, and they would bring you in the sheet of paper. I don't think the hotel was very happy with us afterwards because we had them all taped onto the wall.
Oh, yeah.
And I am talking about the walls were covered. I'm not talking there was 10 here. There was thousands. And then we go out. I don't remember being real nervous in the final. I remember going out in the final and being, okay, we're going to play this.
Well, how did the final game work out? Because oftentimes it works out, you have to win it, and if you lose it, maybe there's a tie, or what was the situation for you guys?
The Blonde brothers were right on our tails. We had beat them during the round robin, and so they were at that stage of the game 8-3. They ended up 8-3, so they would have been 7-2, and we were 8. But if we lose our last game,
so you're 8,
then we're tied, and we would be into a playoff with. And they're on next sheet 12. And we were playing. Bob Charlebois was throwing last rocks.
Yeah, Joe Groka and Bob Charlebois.
We're playing Ontario in the final game of the round robin. If we win, we're going to win. If we lose, we're going to be into a playoff with Manitoba.
And Joe had lost the final 10 years prior.
Oh, was that right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, against Ron Northcott.
Well, the night before we played, so the draw before we played, Joe had curled 100% in the game before. So we knew that they could play. We didn't know these guys as names really at that stage of the game. But you knew darn well that if anyone could curl 100% of the Brier in 1976, that was a hard thing to do with the stones and the ice and the everything else that there was. Right? Anyway, but when we went out, we just played well. We just kept playing the game, and as we went through the game, we were well ahead, and then they wanted to concede. CBC stepped forward, and they were not allowed to concede, and we had to continue on and play.
Oh no! So what Seriously. You're saying is, so there's a moment they're ready to shake hands. You've won the Brier,
yes,
and then the CBC comes in and says, "No."
Correct. Nowadays, it's posted. Nowadays, you know that you got to play your 8 ends.
You know that. Okay, so well, no, actually, even at the trials, it was odd because Cooey and Jacobs quit early.
Yeah.
Did you notice that? We all noticed it. The only reason they were allowed is because there was another game on. So the point being is, TV still has a say,
right?
But even going back then, that was so you'd won it, and then not yet.
Yeah, so they got postponed, but we weren't exactly going to let up at that point in time.
Okay.
It didn't deter us.
It's a good thing you did. I don't know if you knew the story Bernie Sparks told about being up in. This was for cars.
Oh,
believe it or not, this was for cars. They went to shake hands. No, now I'm. Oh no, wait. If it was the one with the cars, they opened the they brought the cars in. When they did that, they changed the weather in the building and the ice all changed. They ended up losing.
Wow.
If you can believe it. Like the guys were ready to quit. I think it was one of those things they're ready to quit, but they said, "Oh, well, let's just keep playing." And they brought the cars in for it, and then they crack a big end, and the next thing you know, they end up losing the game. Kind of, I did not know that story that they were coming. You probably weren't a fan of CBC at that moment, then probably.
No, it would have been fleeting. There was not much going to get in the way of us celebrating at that stage of the game. I remember it so well, and we were beyond belief in terms of the reality. Now, I mean, it went from winning the Purple Heart to now wearing the Canadian colours, and. It was interesting. I just finished reading Warren's book, Sticks and Stones, and talking about things that have changed over the course of time. I found that a very good read. Obviously, Warren had an awful lot to do with things over the course of time. His recollection of a number of these events is nice to see it down on paper. Whether everyone agrees with Warren all the time or not, you got to admit the effort and work that he's put into so much over the course of time. And part of that was documenting the reality that it was very little at that stage that the Canadian Curling Association did for us. We were I can really talk about this more now in retrospect, having regarded my later experiences in life, and saying if it had been possible for Sam Richardson, who did travel down with us, but he was kind of in the background, if it would have been possible for Sam to come with us, it would have been really, really good. So
he did come down to Duluth.
He did get down for part of it down to Duluth, but it wasn't the same in terms of, Sam was a huge supporter over the course of time. I kept in contact with Sam for my whole life, and Jack all the time as well. But the gentleman who was with us on behalf of the Canadian Curling Association, I honestly don't remember who it was, because there wasn't much to do with us. That his job would have been, I guess, to be involved in whatever things needed to be done on the international curling scene and such. We were on our own. We were ill-prepared, ill-equipped, and not veteran enough. We had not played on enough different types of ice.
It's almost a whirwwind too, right? Again, it's not. It's just a couple more weeks after.
You did 10 days, 2 weeks in between which we come home. Oh my God!
So you're coming.
We fly home
all the way home.
Right. We arrived to a ticker tape parade if we had ticker tape. Literally Newfoundland, the scene at the airport was unbelievable. At the time, Premier Moores was our premier. He was Johnny on the spot there at the airport, welcoming us all, well appreciated. And the party went on from there. And in fact, Premier Moores ended up back at my mom and my dad's house afterwards as part of the continuing, celebration, I guess.
So how many days did it last? I'm just wondering. Was it?
Jack was telling me it was a week.
Was
no,
it?
No, not the celebration.
Just to celebrate, yeah.
Well, you had to get ready. I remember at the time, Frank Stent was a loans officer with, or bank manager with Montreal Trust. And I was working. I was an article clerk. I was getting $90 a week. We didn't have any money, and I didn't want to ask mom and dad for the money at the time, And I ended up going to Frank and had to borrow $500
just to go to the World
Championships because we didn't have the money, And $500 doesn't seem like much then. It was a lot.
No, well, think about this. I mean, you played the Bruce Roberts team, right?
Yes.
So I talked to them. I actually a couple weeks ago. I don't know. Maybe I told you on the phone. And so Joey Roberts, the third. He didn't go to the Worlds in 77 because he started a new job and he couldn't get the time off. And the company he's with is like, well, sorry, you can go to the Worlds, but you're going to lose your job. And yet it's one of those, like looking back on it, I hope it was a really good job because you miss out on this sort of history, opportunity.
But still the practical realities of your life. So we go home and take our red shirts, Newfoundland shirts, which weren't shirts, they were heavy sweaters in those days, and bring them over to the local seamstress person to take off the Newfoundland crest and put the green Canada on. I still have the sweater at home.
It so happened you wear red for Newfoundland. Otherwise, if you could have had a different color sweater.
Whatever, but it would certainly clash with the green.
Yeah.
We weren't, of course, we didn't really bother us whether we were a fashion statement or not. And there was whirlwind. It was phenomenal at home. For us in Newfoundland, the winning of the Brier was like winning the Grey Cup. We don't have football. And so it was wonderful for Newfoundland. And, it was the outpouring of affection and emotion was just unbelievable, and still continues to this day.
Yeah.
Except for now his name is Gushue.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then we were off to the Worlds, and we were really ill prepared for it, and not blaming anybody. I mean, we weren't good enough at that stage of the game when we got on the ice that was presented to us down in Duluth. And I say to my guys now, but don't complain about the ice. Don't complain about the ice. Don't complain about rocks. Go out and deal with it. And we didn't. We were trying our best, but we just simply did not deal with it. We won our first 2 games and we lost our next 7. So the worst record that Canada ever had, and that was tough, because then everyone said it was the Brier win a fluke kind of thing, and it really wasn't. But at that time, would the Blonde brothers have been a better representative for us? Probably, because they would have played more games. They would have played more games on different ice surfaces. When we got on that ice surface, we didn't know how to do it, and it was and the guys from Switzerland and Italy and whatever, well, they had played outdoors on the snow, and so they could deal with lousy conditions better than we could. And I'm not blaming anyone other than we didn't do it.
Well, and you went through a gamut of emotions in a very short period of time. So you think about a year before, you're just watching the Brier in New Brunswick. And a year later, you go through the highs of winning this as Newfoundland, first time ever, and just the magic of that. And then a few weeks later, the letdown and the experience of what happens in Duluth. Like, it must have just, and then you got to go back to work probably on Monday because you missed so much work, right? Or whatever it is. So, which is, always amazing about this stuff. I mean, did it take you a while to just grasp what had happened over that span of time, or have you yet? I mean, it just,
basically, I mean, I'm a very positive individual. I mean, I see the bright side of life. I that's what I strive for. I figure every morning, when my philosophy of life has always been the same. I get up in the morning and I have a choice to put a smile on my face or not, and that's my choice, nobody else's. And I try to do it, and my mental health is good and enables me to be able to do that. Some other people, unfortunately, by virtue of their circumstances or otherwise, or their mental health or things along those lines, that they just simply cannot get to that point. I'm fortunate enough that I can, and I do, and I'm happy, and I move on and try to do the best that I can.
My dad always used to say, "That's 5 minutes ago."
Yeah.
There must have been a moment that spring, just sitting around, just kind of enjoying a nice a spring breeze or summer breeze, and think, "Wow, that was something." Like, there had to be a few of those days.
Lots. I mean, it was always at home. People didn't lament the loss of the World Championships. The World Championships was not near so important as winning the Brier.
Well, that's the thing.
The Brier was it.
The Brier was still that was the goal,
Yes.
right? You set out to win a Brier.
Yeah.
You wanted to represent the country well, and I mean, it was odd too. It was kind of the Scotch Cup had been around, of course. Bronstein with Don Duguid had lost it, and that was, I think, the first time. And Don took that to heart and then eviscerated the world in 70 and 71, largely because of that. And then Orist wins with the Labonte boot in 72. And then, of course, you were in the midst of that, what they called the curse, I guess, where it seemed like, well, Canada didn't really win it for 8 years. So for you growing up, it was never this idea that, I'm going to, go to Scotland or Duluth, Minnesota and play in this big event. It was, I'm gonna be at the Canadian National Championship.
And it didn't matter where it was. The Brier. It was the Brier. It wasn't the Brier in Lethbridge.
Yeah.
It was the Brier.
Does it still feel like you're here now? You've been to quite a few after that.
Yeah.
Has it always felt the same?
Oh my God, yes. Yeah, it's different. It's changed. You have to go. You have to roll. You have to roll with the punches, as my dad used to say. And it's still to me the epitome of curling. And to be here with this young group that I am here now, with that wonderful young team of gentlemen and the future of Newfoundland curling. I'm here doing everything that I can to help them to get the best experience out of this that they can.
When you come out and you're out on the ice, or you're just seeing the fans, every time you've been, it has that same kind of sensation. Yeah,
sure it does. You're representing your province, and you're hopefully, and once in a while, you get to represent your country. Yeah, the Brier is just a special part of Canadian history.
So after winning it, you're probably going, I want to do that a few more times. I want to keep going there.
I would have anticipated that it wasn't going to be the last time that Newfoundland won it until 40 years later. Certainly, it was my desire that having won it once, that we were going to go back up and do it and play well again. That was tough for Newfoundland because you have to play people that are better than you. We just didn't have as many excellent teams as there are on the mainland, and we didn't have as many competitions. We weren't competing enough. We weren't traveling for events,
Well, and the cost, if you'd wanted to think about your team that's taking time out of work, spending $500 to go to the Worlds, it's not so easy for you to say, well, we're going to go play in Alberta or out in Ontario and start touring all the time. That wasn't the era at all, right? It was very difficult, and it frankly still is. It's just that there's, it's costly, right? So did you guys play in a CBC Classic?
Yeah, we played the CBC Classic, and the good thing in terms of that was that we did beat the Blondes.
What was that event like? Do you recall?
It was a made-for-TV event, and basically it was going to be 2 games a day being televised, so I remember it being very long, and that the Scottish team and us got along very, very well, and they could consume Scotch, and they were like, you didn't want to try to drink with those guys. They were wonderful. Bill Muirhead and their team, they treated us so well. When we were at the Worlds and we were losing, it was tough. But the Scottish team were a veteran group of curlers that really took us under their wing. Now, they ultimately lost to Bruce in the final. And I don't know about this story because I might get them in trouble with their association 50 years later. There was a big contingent there from Thunder Bay to support the Canadian curling team. And notwithstanding the fact that we had not done well, they were very supportive of us. And towards the end of the week, they, through a thank you kind of party, invited a whole bunch of Canadian fans and such to go down and meet in the host hotel and have a little celebration kind of thing. It wasn't going to be a gold medal celebration or anything close to it, but it was nice that all the fans were doing this for us. In the midst of it, who shows up with the Scottish team? And so they get up.
This is before they played the final.
This would be before the final. So before the final, they're still playing. And one of the things that you back in those days, you always exchange pins and at the Worlds, and you exchange gifts. I know our Premier Moores at the time made sure that we had some Newfoundland screech to hand out to everybody and other things. And anyway, it was nice that the Scottish team were there. But what happened is that they had these skeen doos, which is the knife that they would put down in when you're wearing a kilt and you have your stockings. It's the knife the ceremonial knife that would be on display with a large emerald star type stone in it. and they presented us with one of those each.
Oh, wow.
Which I still have at home. I subsequently found out that they were originally intended for the host team, which would have been the Roberts team, but they decided they would give us to us instead. Yeah. And this is before they played.
Which is interesting, right? Because I think largely I got a sense from talking to a lot of the international players that over the years, like, Canada was sort of the enemy. We were, consistently the winners. And so a lot of times it was, the other countries would sort of cheer each other on. And I've heard this, Erica Brown was interesting talking to her about Doherty Nordby, and she saw Doherty more as a competitor, but also kindred spirit, and that we're trying to beat the Canadians, right? That was kind of I do get a sense, and I've heard, a little of the history that Bruce was an interesting character. Up until very recently, he was living in the woods by himself.
Is that right?
Did you have any memories of them and playing them, or just that?
Oh, no, I certainly do. They weren't our favorite squad there. But then again, a couple of the other teams were not wonderful to deal with either.
There was a did it feel like that way? Like there was
quite
a stronger competitive, more so than the Brier even.
Yeah,
right?
And then to a degree, and particularly in relation to one of the Nordic teams being confrontational on the ice. That was interesting, an interesting approach.
Well, of course, as you said, you've softened over the years, but back then I can't see you backing down too much.
I was once one particular incident that in the midst of it all, and this is one of the things that subsequently in being involved in coaching, that I have made sure that I prepared the team for the eventuality that it might occur, is the individual voice that can definitely permeate the circumstances. Like at one point in time when Marcel was having to address a spectator when Randy was on and their team was on that wonderful roll, and they were being heckled, and basically the game almost stopped while Marcel advised the fellow that perhaps that he might face some consequences for his behavior, shall we say. Anyway, I was in the midst of I was trying as hard as I could possibly try at the Worlds. I mean, really, we were struggling to make a shot. I mean, I'm used to making shots, so this is tough on me. And in the midst of it all, I hear this voice, come on, McDonald, make a shot. I do have to confess that I did try to find the individual in the midst of the stands. I didn't go chasing him or whatever, but my natural reaction was to try to spot him. And he, whoever it was, sought the anonymity of the crowd, shall we speak, and no one was pointing him out to me.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, there was
so it was a bit of a home crowd then.
Yeah, well, no, that would have been a Canadian.
Oh, really? That was a Canadian.
There was a Canadian contingent rooting hockey-wise. But anyway, so do you remember those things? Sure you do. So now when I'm dealing with teams, we say, okay, but you got to remember that that's merely somebody. You can never let the naysayers hold you back. So in terms of what I'm doing, I'm a lot more prepared for it nowadays, and I try to get teams that I'm involved with to be prepared for those things. They are merely distractions.
Like I think Botcher was certainly looked prepared for it on Saturday when they had to play Darren Moulding in the James Grattan rink from New Brunswick, and the last, the fans were for the most part cordial until as it kind of heated up towards the end, and Brendan missed that, fairly surprising shot in 9, which made it a game all of a sudden and tied into the last end. A missed tick shot early on, which was, again, odd. But then, so it gets a little close to the end, and then there's that bot calling out his name.
Preparing for noise and preparing for Indians, it's funny, the crowd noise you prepare for, because it's wonderful, like whether they're cheering for you or the next guy. I mean, it's just wonderful to be in an environment where it's occurring. But when you have that pregnant pause sometimes, and there's just one person yelling or saying something, that it can be disconcerting.
Mm-hmm.
You can't let it throw you off your course,
So your first Brier, but not your last. You had visits. You've been there how many decades then? Well, now you're probably up to a few decades at least being in a Brier in different capacities. But as a player, you were
played in
you returned in '79, I guess, right? Was your next visit?
70s, 80s, 90s, and then in '98 was the last time I played as a skip, and then in the 2000s as fifths. And
2002
so
were you 2002 were you a player though, or were you a fifth?
No, I was fifth for Brad.
Okay,
or no, fifth for Glenn Goss. and Bill Jenkins and those. 2012, I was fifth to Brad. But in terms of like life, it was funny. I recently had to complete a resume, which is something that I have not had to do in some times. We were on the Scottish tour in 2018, the tour of Scotland, the Strathcona Cup. Wonderful life experience. And I had to prepare a resume for that, and then I had to upgrade my resume there just a couple of weeks ago for the Canadian Curling, or for Curl Canada, because I applied to become a high-performance consultant, which is the capacity in which I am here now. And then when I was summing it up at the end, I put down has appeared nationally over 7 decades.
Yeah.
Which unfortunately is a bad reality.
But good. It means you've been around 7 decades. So that's
60s, the 70s, and 80s between the schoolboy and the winter games, and the mix, and the men's, and the senior men. The only one I never got to was the senior men.
Never did, eh? Okay,
never got there. Got to be a runner-up. That was part of the period of time when I was with Brad and those guys, and so I didn't really compete as much. But we lost. It certainly was my goal to be able to say that I would have gone to the mixed and the men's and the juniors and the seniors. The hard one to get being the juniors, because you only get the limited time crack at that. So I never did get to the seniors, but then we went to the Masters, and we won the Masters, and got to the Olympics, the pre-Olympics.
Well, just wait. Here's the thing. You just wait for Brad to turn 50, then you just hold a broom and throw the first 2. And I think probably a good chance you might be able to squeeze in. I mean, look at Kevin Cooey making the shots he made yesterday. He's got 3 years to go before he's a senior. My goodness,
I know.
These guys are still in shape, and
they're wonderful. Yeah,
I think guys of your era didn't always stay in the same kind of shape as the boys.
No, and the other thing about that too, though, is the corn broom and the rink rat and such. I mean, you front enders weren't around long, but you had to be physically able to do that, and to be able to do that well into your 40s. You beat up. I wonder now whether my hands are the way they are, partly because of the reality of pounding that they took for so many years.
So you had a bunch of other Brier visits, I guess. 79, and then there was
87. 87 in terms of being
81, which was an interesting one. That was 81 was the Kerry Burnick against Hackner in the final. That was an interesting one out in
Halifax.
Yeah, Halifax. What like any kind of those sort of repeat visits? Any sort of memories? Was there?
Oh, one was there a very, very vivid one was playing Kerry in our first game, their first game. So Neil
and they're the young team, like you had been in '76.
We're out there in the Brier. We're the veteran team to the degree that we've been there. I mean, cripes, I'm still only 30.
Yeah,
but we had Johnny Allen and Neil and Jimmy Miller, and we had a pretty darn good team, corn broom guys and everything. We're playing Kerry in the first game, his first game,
and they're all push brooms, right?
And they're all and we're out there, and I call Neil, a nice safe shot at the time, draw the 4 foot. Let's start up the game here. Let's get used to the ice a little bit. Neil comes just slightly heavy to the back of the 4 foot, and Kerry froze it. Yeah. And I have to say, I'm like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Where did that come from? Are these guys that good, or are they just being cocky here? And they were that good. They were a great credit. And Kerry did so well. He must love Halifax because he repeated their years afterwards. Yeah.
The story of Kerry was always, if you want to throw a tight guard, really close to the rings, he just come right around it.
Yeah.
And then nobody in that era did that. That just teams didn't do it, especially in the first end. We want to kind of settle in and see how things go. We don't want to lose it in the first end, but Kerry's out there trying to win it in the first end.
Another highlight going forward, because I mean, to me, curling and coaching are instrumental in relation to my being at this stage. Was 87 with Mark. With Mark knows where they end his team. They were Eugene Trickett, Randy Perry, and Rob Thomas.
And you must have seen Mark grow up then, and his
Mark
development.
was very, very good player. Mark was one of the top curlers in Canada in terms of the qualifying and such. So I was their fifth man. And the fifth man over the course of time, it could be, certainly in my case, it was coaching. Doing everything that you could possibly do to assist that team to do better.
And did you ever take some things that you learned from Sam and try to instill those things all the time? Yeah.
All the time. Yeah. Even with Brad, I told Brad, what do you think about, he and I would communicate about, this is what we're looking at doing here with Brad, pre-Olympic trials, or before the trials. But anyway, back to 87 with Mark and the boys, we're ending up against, we end up with the bronze medal. But we're playing against, Bernie, with Jim Armstrong at third in the semi-final. And it's a good game.
I talked to Bernie about that game, actually. That was quite a game.
And but we were right into it, and then they did get a little advantage on us late there, and TSN, I guess, was at the time. I'm not sure if it was TSN, and they literally stopped covering it towards the tail end of the game and switched off.
I think it would have been CBC at the time.
CBC, okay, and it ended up that's how Dave Hodge ended up not being with them anymore, because he basically flipped his pencil up in the air and say, you can't basically do this. Worked out great for him, because he ultimately went out and got his own gig that he was doing for years afterwards. But it was kind of a little bit disappointing that they didn't finish it right to the end.
Well, Bernie told the story that there was a bunch of people in the patch watching, and then when it went off the TV, all of a sudden the rink got busy.
Yeah,
they came out because I guess a lot of people it was a good patch, and there was a few people in there, and maybe the stands weren't full, and then they had to come because they couldn't see the last few ends.
But yeah, Mark and those guys were competitive at that stage, and they really were.
And I guess part of the struggle, and you saw this with Brad, so I wanted to ask you about that, and having seen and worked with Brad in the development, how do you get 4 great players, right? Like, so you can have a Mark Norsworthy, but how do you get, and not just great, because it's not to say that some of these players couldn't be great, but how do you get 4 that can commit? And as the sport starts to evolve into the 90s and 2000s, it's harder and harder to make that life choice and that life commitment to say, I'm going to focus this kind of energy on this sport. So do you take someone like Mark, or then even a young Brad? How do you develop those teams, right? What's needed? It's tricky, right?
It's very tricky. It is right back down at the grassroots level. It is very difficult to manage to be on a plane, even with all of the hard work and effort that you need to put in. It's obvious, in order to succeed, you got to work at it and practice and determine what needs to be done to achieve the goal, all those things. But if you're in Newfoundland right now, like our boys are with Nathan and his team, they're working hard. They've been together 8 years now already. But ultimately, if they wish to be competitive on this scene where they are right now they're preparing for the under-21 nationals next week. And the Brier is setting the stage for them. I do want to jump forward in terms of the time of how all this happened.
But it's difficult, right? You got to find, if you're a great player in Newfoundland, you have to find at least 3 other great players that are all as committed. And
so I'm saying, keeping my team here together now, the group of players who are here at the Brier right now, for them to take that next step is really what you're asking.
Or even looking back, when you saw Brad ready to make that step, or what Mark was trying to accomplish, like when you saw what struggles might exist. And so, as an example, how did Mark not maybe move over that hump and Brad did? What was it a change in the era? Was it teammates? Was it
just the commitment, the ability to be able to have enough money and sponsorship to be able to attend enough events that you're playing against people that are better than you, so you get better. We tried to do that with the travel spiel. Yeah. We had the Canadian Airlines International Travel Speed at one point in time. I was the one that was instrumental in relation to the start of all that, because I was looking at the situation of all that. It wasn't just about me.
It's a bit selfish then, too. You wanted to bring great teams to...
Not just for me, for all of us. Because I didn't want people going up from Newfoundland and wanting to go and get the autograph of somebody. You're going up, you're seeing the great Al Hackner or the great Lick Grang, and you want to get their autograph, and then you're going to go up and play them. You're already on a playing field that's a little bit off. So we tried to bring them in, and we went to Canadian Airlines, and Canadian Airlines, Gary Reddy in the crowd at the time, basically agreed, okay, so they would give us 2 tickets for every 2 bought. So now we could say to people, so they could justify coming to Newfoundland, as opposed to justifying to their wife why they're not driving down 200 miles to the next community to play in the cash box field. You're going to Newfoundland. What are you doing that for? Good prizes, a trip for anyone could fly, to Hawaii. And they would sponsor one team for us. They brought the team in free to that team. So from my perspective in organizing was to bring them in so that you can these are just normal people, just like you and I are. They're just better than we are at curling. So let's learn from them. And of course, first year that happened, we had 32 teams in it. Most of them were from local community, but we did have teams from all the Maritimes and such. What happens, of course, is Al and Rick and the boys came in. They out-partied us, they outplayed us, and they won first place, and they went home with all the money.
I think the first line you said there, to go to Newfoundland and out-party the Newfoundlanders.
It was pretty impressive. It really was.
Did Al kiss the fish?
Oh my
probably
God,
must have at some point.
He would have had to. Yeah. We would have had a screech, and Jimmy Miller, my old teammate, was in charge of that.
Okay, yeah.
But so what happened then? It grew, and we ended up bringing in all the good players. Jeff came down, and we had all of the really good players coming down. I mean, that's where I would have met Pierre Charette for the first time. And of course, it was great because you got to play the real good players, and you learned, hey, gee, we can beat these guys. Then Mark knows what he wants. Like the second or the third year, Mark knows what he wanted. Hey, Mark won.
Local boy wins it, and
and so it buoyed us up. Unfortunately, economically, it didn't sustain itself over the course of time once Canadian folded and such. But that's the big sort of drawback for us, being able to get to the competition and to get out of Newfoundland. Like, I mean, the budget that Brad had back in the day to get out of Newfoundland was the major part of the budget.
Well, I wonder if let's say Brad goes, and I want to talk about that team. So Brad goes to that Olympic trials and doesn't win. Does something change maybe? Or do you think they're still good enough. They're probably getting a lot of Brier trips, but are they going to get, because I don't know, what were things at that time, kind of early 2000s, you're coming out of the boycott. What was sponsorship like? I mean, I know what the 90s were like quite a bit. I still remember the story in 95, we talked about Burtnick winning in 95. They were, they were negative $10,000 when they went to that Brier for the year. Like they were,
we would have been negative every year.
And that's what I'm wondering. Like, would Gushue have had the same opportunity if he doesn't? I don't know. Like as a young player,
Brad had the wonderful, wonderful reality of focus on his goals, and in determining what needed to be done to achieve those goals in a logical way, and nothing would be able to deter him from it. He is the driving force, and he's got some great supporting cast members, but he's the guy that had the list up on the back of his door, and on the back of that door was the list of the things that he wished to achieve, and one of those achievements was the Olympic gold medal. This is when he's in high school. So in high school, if you read his yearbook, it will be goals, Olympic gold. Can you picture in his community then the other kids in his class, in his school saying, oh my God, look at that guy here. How full is he of himself or whatever? Right? Seriously. But it was his goal, and he has been single-minded in relation to getting it. He deserves everything that he has gotten, and he was the driving force that made it occur, notwithstanding our physical location in Newfoundland. He's a great player. He's a great ambassador for the sport. Mark Nicols has been fantastic. He's had great teammates over the course of time.
So let's talk about that 05, 06, the 06 gold medal team. Of course, but even just before Russ comes on board, because in a way, then that's a little bit like your team in '76, young, been at junior success, but I mean young, right? The point being is, was he maybe around the same age as you? I wonder at the time, or was it just coming into that? That early?
Yeah, they would have been pretty young.
Yeah. And so when did you first meet Brad? When did you start working with him?
Oh, I started work. I started admiring him from just his achievements. I would have been at the airport when he lost his gold medal. When he missed his last shot at the juniors that first year. I mean, that was his fourth year there, I think, or fifth. But he got to the final, and that was with Mark and Jamie and Mike Adam. When they lost and they came back, I mean, they were devastated. And I was down at the airport. I wasn't working with him or anything at that stage of the game at all. I wasn't even coaching anyone. But I was there at the airport, and I've been at the airport every time for any Newfoundland team that comes back like that. An interesting story about Russ Howard and Brad and that loss. Mm-hmm. This is a real interesting story. It's worth having. Found out this much later after we had won the gold medal, I think. But I mean, Russ telling the story of how that year when he lost the final, Brad was in Moncton. That was in Moncton. And Russ was the honorary chairman of the event in Moncton. And Brad missed his last shot, I mean, which is devastating. It can end a person's curling career if they don't approach it right. They were leaving the club, and Wendy was on the way out the club, and Russ looked out, and Brad was still out on the ice about the loss. And I told him about the story, his reality, that he'd been in 4 Canadian finals, that he lost. Everyone knows the 2 that he won, but he was in 4 that he lost. And so he consoled Brad out on that ice after that championship.
Wow. Yeah.
Good for Russ Howard. Ultimately, at the end of the day, who gets picked to be your fifth man?
Yeah. I mean, it's just sparking a relationship that led to history. Yeah.
One of the key things, I've been very fortunate in my coaching career. Mm-hmm. I'm here now, and the 3 times I have inherited a team that I've been fortunate enough to be part of ultimate later success. They all had one commonality, and that's Jeff Thomas. Jeff Thomas had coached Brad through the whole period where they had a 5-year plan. They had a 5-year plan to success that was going to culminate in winning the Brier. And Jeff, unfortunately, could not continue on with that whole plan because he was running his own business and he's assisting Brad, and he was also coaching his son, and he couldn't keep all those balls in the air at the same time. So it ended up that Brad subsequently came into my office and asked me if I would be interested in giving him a hand. So that's how I got involved with Brad. I became involved with an extremely well coached, wonderfully technically gifted, hard-working. When his son was making the university championships, and so I took over that week when we were playing for the national university championship, and we won. I say we won. The Thomas team won. The Thomas coach team won. The boys have to do it. Yeah. Coaches assist, point them in the right direction. This time around, Jeff is over with Brad again over at the Olympics in Beijing, and I phoned him up to wish him good luck. He and I were salmon fishing together this summer, you know.
You reminded me of a question that Burnsy wanted me to ask you, which is, do you know the limit?
I do. We never exceed the limit.
But no, did you hear the story? You told Burnsy to ask Jeff that, and Jeff's like, okay, you got,
yeah.
He knows the limit on every type of fish you got.
He knows.
Yeah. Okay, yeah.
He knows the slot limit. But anyway, so what happened on this one is that I phoned up Jeff. Didn't want to interfere with Brad or any of the boys, and good luck is not part of what I say because luck has nothing to do with winning the Olympics. It's work and preparation and all of that. So anyway, I phoned up Jeff to wish him the best and all the rest. And in the course of about 10 minutes into the conversation, he said, oh, by the way, he said, I'm going to be away. And the boys, young team. I said, sure. It was COVID. No coaching.
Yeah.
And so that's how I ended up being involved with Nathan and his team. And so Brad Jeff was at the over in Beijing trying to win the gold or the silver or the bronze, win a medal, participate well, not win anything, participate well. And so I'm now, so then I go with the boys and what do I inherit? But I look and I see Nathan and Nate and Ben and Sam, and they're all, after two sessions of watching them, and they're all coming at me. So they've entered the tankard as a lead up to the under-21, right? So their goal this year is to win the national under-21s. And so now I am new to this scene. Don't even know the boys other than congratulating them on winning. I don't know them. But after 2 days of watching them throwing at me, I made the comment. I said, well, boys, there's obviously nothing that needs to be addressed in relation to that a little room adjustment can't fix. Yeah. I said, so I presume you're the favorite in the tankard, are you? And then off we go and we get 9-0, and so now here we are at the Brier. But Jeff is still at Beijing, and we don't know at that point in time whether Jeff is going to be fifth for Brier. I'm now the coach of the team, get my certifications up to date, so on with Pro Canada. Jeff comes back, they have to, by virtue of the rules, coming back into Canada. So now we're into the under-21 provincials, and we go into the under-21 provincials, and Jeff comes back for the last couple of games there, and, turns out that Brad and the boys aren't requiring the fifth man. Jeff is the coach, and Jeff's the coach of this team. I was just the caretaker. 3 times that I've had to stand in relation to teams, and they've all got that one. The common denominator of all of these teams, from my perspective, is Jeff Thomas. And while I've been here this week and watching him working with the boys and the details to which he goes and the kindness that he has in terms of his dealing with them, the way that he addresses everything, he's far and away one of the best coaches that this country has ever seen. And there's some great ones. But Jeff Thomas, to me, is my idol.
I want to go back because I think I read an article about this as well. So at the time that Brad's men's team has qualified for the trials, they are not expected to win that. They're a young team. They're up and coming, but and even then, the funny thing is, if they were a young team up and coming in Manitoba or Alberta, they probably still even have a little more exposure at the time because the game is still kind of provincial. Like I think I'd say today it's largely not, right? But back then it was. Brad's not getting the coverage of these other teams. So how does the Russ Howard conversation begin? And I understand that there were conversations that took place and things like that about when did that percolate originally, do you recall, and what?
Well, I became involved and went off to the Brier with him. So this the year preceding. Keith Ryan was part of the team that had won the right to go to the trials. Keith is an extremely good player, hardworking, guy from was third on the team and had won the Canada East. I think they beat Wayne Tuck in the final, and that earned their spot into the Olympic trials. But they would not have been a favorite team, and they got in through that slot that was there. We go off to the Brier that year, and we don't succeed very well. Mike Adam was involved as fifth man, and Jamie Korab, and in any event, it kind of evolved. One of the questions that Brad had put, and he doesn't even actually remember all this, was, do you think this team as it is presently constituted can win the Canadian Olympic curling trials? It's a pretty basic question. And, the answer to that question at that point in time was not the way that it was then, and it had nothing to do with anybody. It just wasn't gelling to make it happen. And we come back and we play the Players' Championship, and Keith wasn't available to play in that for work commitments and such, and Mike filled in, and for whatever reason, and this was the nucleus of their old junior team. They had been runner-up in and then won. The only difference was that the year that they won, Brent Hamilton, Wayne Hamilton's son, was filled in and won. As a matter of fact, curled 100% in the final. But, there was the young squad. They had all been trained the same way. And so Mike stepped in, and they were runner-up in the Players' Championship in St. John's. And it was, anyway, between the jigs and the reels, it ended up that the team was changed to those four guys. And so that's how we went forward in terms of the following start of the following season. But then as you're progressing, it was like, well, you need a fifth man. It's funny that this is an area where everyone has their own memory of it. Yeah. I have a pretty good memory of it because I was the one who was keeping the minutes of the meetings, because we used to have meetings at my house on a regular basis, and there was an agenda and there was 13 things on it, and mixed in with it you'd have mostly positive things and a few negative things in the middle. And one of the things that was always on it was fundraising, sponsorship, because, this was expensive, right? $60,000 was the budget for airline stuff. How do we improve 1 to 1.5% from here to the trials? Because they were already very good. You're not looking at a major improvement and all that. And how do you do the selection of a fifth man? What are you looking for in terms of a fifth man? So we developed a criteria of it, because now it was really interesting, because I read an article recently where Russ was talking about it and Brad was talking about it, and I'm looking at it and I say, really? I said, that's interesting how everyone thinks it was. But
it's one thing I love about doing this, Toby, because everyone has their own kind of version. Like, you read Warren's book, right? Everybody has their own version of how they remember things, right?
Well, I have the agenda meeting from November or whatever it was. Here's what was on it: the role and selection of a fifth player. And what are you looking for? And there was 13 criteria that we developed in terms of, and then we applied those criteria. Once we developed, before you can select the player, you got to determine what it is you're looking for. So, we needed to look, and so what we did that whole thing. I wrote an article on it, actually. It's on the Canadian Curling Association site. And so there was a criteria applied, and then it was a selection of, we had 6 players that we were considering. 3 of them were from Newfoundland. One of them had recently left Newfoundland, but we considered him still being part of the team, which was Mark Ward. It was with Mark. I'm not going to say all the names.
Okay.
But there was 6. And then we applied the criteria to the 6. So this wasn't like Russ Howard was number 1 and we didn't think about anything else other than it. We did apply a criteria, and Russ Howard was almost like doing a job description. And the best one that fit that job description was Russ Howard.
So he was one of the 6.
Oh, yes.
He was on the list. Okay, yeah.
Oh, yeah, he was number 1 on the list, and he quickly became number 1 on the list.
As you started going through all these.
Right.
Yeah.
That was one of the things that he didn't meet, and that was the sports psychological approach of the team at that point in time, because the guys were doing these scripts, which they had pre-prepared discs, where they would actually motivational-oriented CDs that you would put earplugs in and you would listen to prior to your game and things like that. So, well, Russ obviously didn't fit into that.
He's kind of a little more old school for sure.
Yeah, he figured out how to be pretty good without all that. So then it came down to the selection of the phone call. So that fell on my doorstep.
Well, I was wondering, okay, yeah, so who does make that call?
I did.
Yeah. Okay. How's that decided, though? Just
we were a team meeting, just how we're going to make the approach. I knew Russ. Russ probably wouldn't have remembered it at the time, but when I was chairing the travel spiel, they were our guests. They were our host team one of those times. We brought him in. So it was the real good team he had there that time with Madaw and the corner, and it was the.
Well, and you were also in the 87 Brier, the first one he wins, right? That was,
Yes. But we didn't know each other then. We were competitors then.
Yeah,
You know, we didn't get to know each other really until this. So anyway, I had to feel my way around it. I had to check and find out, first of all, whether Glenn had asked him. Because he had asked Glenn, I think, you know, and you didn't want to have a situation where you asked someone and they said no, and then whoever you asked after was your second choice. I found out that he hadn't been asked.
Okay, so you found that out first.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
So I knew that he was free.
Which, by the way, there's a question I'll have to ask Glenn on this: is why didn't you ask your brother?
Yeah, there you go. That's your next question. But anyway,
by the way, maybe it would have been that.
Anyway,
how that turned out.
It was an interesting call because I mean, Russ and I weren't bosom buddies or anything at that stage of the game. I mean, he would have known me, and I respected him. But anyway, I phoned him up, and before I say that, though, one of the things we had laughed about was that we felt that we were in the envious position that we could ask anybody in Canada who had not already qualified for the trial,
which is a pretty big pool,
to be our fifth man. And boy, it was a big pool. But you know, when we applied our criteria to it, it shrunk down pretty quick. It shrunk down pretty quick. Anyway, so then I phoned up Russ, and Russ decided that he came back on board.
Was it immediate, or
I don't remember if it was immediate, but it wasn't long. And so then we were. He was on board, but he was on board for fifth man.
That was originally
he was on board for fifth man. That's but it was kind of like a little bit like asking Jack Nicols to be on your golf team. You know, I mean, it was like he had all that wealth of experience and such. We didn't know how good he was going to be in terms of all of that. But once he came on board, then the first time that we could get ice anywhere was July that year, and that was over in Nova Scotia or New Brunswick, Nova Scotia. And so Russ came down, drove down, and we all flew in, and we had our first practice session in the summertime in July, instead of me being up in Labrador salmon fishing.
Yeah.
And so that was the first conversation he and I had was when the boys were we were in the rink, and the boys were already after going outside, and Russ and I were in the dressing room. And I said, the first words I said to him, I said, the first thing you and I need to do is to figure out how we keep out of each other's way. And right away we decided he's going to hold the broom, because he needed to learn the vagaries of everybody's deliveries.
Okay, so he was holding the broom for practice.
He was holding the broom for practice, and I'm standing over his shoulder and talking to him. And then he was standing over Brad, obviously then he quickly got into the whole, whatever he could do to start to assist people. And the key thing about this whole thing in relation to Russ Howard is at no point did Russ Howard ever try to make this his team.
Yeah.
It was, I coached Russ more than the rest of the boys.
Which is pretty impressive if you think about somebody that's got that resume at that stage to be able to do that. And Russ is a strong personality. And I know that because I've heard a million stories, and a lot of these guys are. Right?
They're not all positive.
And maybe like you did, he softened a bit over the years, right? Just a little, and was able to see how this was going to unfold and what the best way for success is.
He literally, like I say, I coached him more than any of the rest of the boys. It's not even coaching, really. It's almost like mentoring. He did everything he could possibly do to fit into this team, and whatever he needed to do that he could use in terms of making them better, he did. But he never tried to make it his team. This was Brad's and the boys' team, and he was trying to fit in.
Such a unique situation. Of course, famously, the team they play in the final is Jeff Stoughton, who said what a lot of people were thinking at the time, which was, I don't think this works. I don't think you can just sort of bring in a new player and challenge the dynamic of a team, because that's the way. Prior to 2005, most of us thought, right? It was, and you go back to those trials in '87 when they would try to mash teams together, and it's funny because it's something in this sport that I think will always exist. Is this as it evolves and improves? Is, can you create a team, or can you have it organically develop? And what I'm hearing is this is still an organic development with thought and process involved. It's tricky, right? I mean, Warren would sit there and say, and he's an old football guy. Warren Hansen would say, I'm a coach and I'm just going to get like 8 players and I'll pick the 4 best, and then and I'll decide who does what and who does what. And it's never been a sport like that. It's kind of been a blend of golf and team sport. In golf, the coach doesn't sit there and tell him what shot to hit. And so I think a lot of times, it's almost like a golfer is like the skip, except that in curling, they've also got 3 caddies and they all happen to actually help out make the shots. And then they also actually, so it's a different but the mindset a little bit, right, in terms of curling.
I agree.
And I thought it was so fascinating. You're into that final now after Jeff's the fellow who had sort of come out and said that. Well, like you say, originally he was the fifth. So how did it become that he wasn't the fifth and he became one of the?
It evolved over time. Again, we had our schedule of events that we were attending. And whenever it was possible that I attended like one or two, but economically and practically from my perspective, I'm still running the law office. I was only at a couple of events. There was a couple of events where Russ went to, but basically what happened mostly was the team would go and it'd be 4 players. All of the games, all of the events that they went to with the 4 players without Russ did not qualify. All of the ones that they went to with Russ playing in some capacity, they did qualify. So it became an issue of this is not a real hard coaching decision or team decision.
It's a small sample size. However, when we have the world champion play with us,
when we have the world
who's a really good player, even though he might be in his later years, he's still pretty good at this game. And he's got this young team. It seemed to work. I guess it's something that it probably, not in that development, but the idea of having young players with an old veteran had existed, right, in past years. And
so he came on board, and then Russ Howard. Russ brought what he brings to the table. A couple of fast-track little issues and how things happen. All of the events that he played in, they qualified in. All the events that he didn't play in, they didn't qualify in. Russ needs to be in the lineup. How does that happen? That whole transition in relation to
say it then, or like
who's going? Oh no, there was we were sitting around the table. We would have regular meetings. Basically, the only time we could have our meetings was Wednesday night. Because the boys would be traveling. I mean, leave from Newfoundland, you're mainly leaving on Thursday to go to the event, and you're not getting back until Sunday night if you don't qualify, or Monday night if you do, or, so Wednesday night was kind of the night that we would meet, generally at my house, sit around the table, have a meeting. Russ would be in the center of the table on a phone, on the phone, and so part of it, we eventually put it to a vote. Where everyone wrote down their ideal lineup kind of thing, and I took the lineups, and effectively it was determined what the best lineup was, and then it was everyone accepted that fact and moved forward from there. And I tipped my hat to Mike Adam because he immediately took on the role of fifth man on the basis of how can he do the very best job as a fifth man, and he did, and including stepping in for Jamie Korab in the final game of the round robin at the Olympics when Jamie was so sick that he didn't even look at it on TV or anything. He couldn't do it, and Mike steps in and shot like 90%.
Was there a conversation about whether Russ holds the broom or doesn't hold the broom, or where he plays?
That was all part of it. All that part of it was all part of the dynamic where it would fit.
But he was never going to sweep, I'm assuming, right? Or was there some?
He was never going to sweep.
Where, like, did Russ say? I can just hear him. I can hear him on your speakerphone saying, "All right, number 1, boys."
No,
I'm not sweeping.
It had to remain not sweeping. So he was at second, and the part of the reality here is I'm dealing with Russ in New Brunswick, and I'm at home, so our conversations are on the phone, or he's in the middle of the meeting on a cell phone in the middle of my dining room table. Now, I mean, obviously the boys are conversing when they get together and they're playing in events and such, but from my perspective on it was different. And one of the times conversations I remember distinctly, and it'd be interesting if you asked Russ this one, if he remembers it, because he was starting to have knee problems. Because Russ being Russ, now that he's playing second stone, he's out there trying to be the very best second stone that he can. So everyone would anticipate, well, I'm going to have to learn to throw more weight, and it ended up throwing more weight. He was having knee problems. And I said, Russ, it appears to me, I said, you're one of the best broom hitters in the world. I said, you don't need to throw peel weight. I said, you can throw board weight and split rocks if that's what you need to do. And that's what he did. He softened up his takeout, so you don't see Russ throwing any.
He doesn't need to be Mark Nicols, right?
Seconds.
Yeah, because at the time,
Mark was on the team there.
But that's the thing. He's got Mark right after him. It's like, you don't need to be Mark. You're probably looking at Mark going, I think I got to try to, maybe he was thinking subconsciously, I got to see if I can throw like that. Well, why? Throw the way you throw, right?
Yeah, throw your normal, comfortable up weight and put the broom in the right spot. And
you still see Glenn. I mean, you see Glenn do that. Glenn's not trying to be Kevin Cooey out there. He's got to be Glenn Howard.
See the final game. You look at the final game when we beat Uzi Papalimi in the final and watch Russ Howard's record in peels, 100%. Made them all. And we used to joke about it.
Did you measure the timer on it? It's probably not the same as Mark's.
No, there was no 5-seconders coming down. Not even any 8-seconders coming down. I mean, he would have been thrown about. I can't think. I suppose he was thrown 8.5. But so that quickly became part of it. He was very willing to learn, and he did. And and to teach. And one of the best things was, and again, it was when we got to the trials in Halifax. We were the pumpkin patch. We were dressed in orange, and Russ and Brad were together in the room, just like Sam Brad, the Richardson way, in terms of the old guy and the new guy, and they never stopped talking. They were yakking at each other all the time.
Yeah.
Both of them commented to me on that in terms of that they were constantly learning and questioning and back and forth and back and forth. Going back to the comments that Jeff made about no chance. I mean, the reality of all that, Steve Gould, who you mentioned there earlier, Steve was on Jeff's team. Yeah. Steve's good buds with all of our team. He's such a nice man. His father was our driver back in the 98 Brier, actually. But Steve had, when Jeff's comments were initially hitting the news media out there, he called Jamie Korab and explained it all to Jamie. And so it wasn't even a real issue amongst our team, although Brad subsequently said that it motivated him a bit.
Well, no, and part of it is we all know how sports writers are going to want to create a story or something about it. But I mean, I think the challenge is you should never, ever say that something can't be done. That's the wording, right? It's more the wording. But I know a lot of us would have thought, hey, that's disruptive to the team. It's such a fascinating historic story in the context. And I think, how it was done was not something Canadian curling had ever really done to any effect before. And I, really didn't understand the story about how it evolved and how it was done. So it's pretty fascinating.
Continued right through. There's always little things. To make that work, you had to be at it all the time, right? But I got to go back to the Jeff Stoughton comment. He said no chance, right? So that headlines at home in Newfoundland was no chance, And some local news media wanted to interview Brad in relation to it or whatever, and he was on the way. He was like literally on the way to go to the station to be interviewed, and he called me, and I called up the station and said he wasn't coming. And then I phoned up Brad and said, "You're not going, please. You don't need to do this. All of Newfoundland is going to defend you here. You don't have to do this yourself." So he didn't. He did not do that interview. And all Newfoundland did it. But besides all that, in terms of the context of what Jeff Stoughton was saying, Jeff Stoughton is up in Manitoba being interviewed in relation to the realities of the upcoming trials. And he was asked questions about, who do you think the favorites are? Well, I mean, pick them. Do you want to go with Kevin? Do you want to go with Kevin Cooley? Do you want to go with Kevin? Do you want to go with Randy? Do you want to go with himself? Do you want to go with Pat Ryan? So I mean, basically, after going through all of those, how do you think they'll do? How do they come to, well, what about young Gushue? No chance. I mean, it was absolutely, if you were a betting man, if you were, it would have been no chance. Yeah. And it was a bit of a motivator for Brad.
Kind of like if you'd have been a betting man when the Jack MacDuff went to 19. I mean, there's parallels here, right? You must have even that.
Back to the beginning of this interview when we were talking about the disappointment of losing in Duluth. I always wanted to see Newfoundland. I won't say vengeance. I'm never a vengeance person. To show that, hey, hang on now. We can do this.
We can wear the maple leaf, and we can represent.
And we did, and that certainly.
And in a way, Russ was at that point kind of a Maritimer, right? You could count him sort of like Jack was from the Maritimes, right?
He was Canadian.
He's Canadian.
No, no,
but there is a Maritime pride. There's a Newfoundland pride, and there's a Maritime pride as well, right? I think that's kind of nice.
And they started working really, really well together, and of course, all the rest of the team were so accepting. But I got to go back to Mike Adam. I mean, Mike as fifth man was just yeoman. He was just. Anything he could possibly do. When we go out for the timeouts, we would both go out on the ice. And he and Mark Nicols are best friends. They were each other's best man. So if we went out on the ice, whatever we would have had to discuss with the team going out on the ice, Mike was going to go over to Mark, and it was like, you and your best buddy are going to have a little chat, and I would go to the rest of the squad.
Anything else you want to say about the Olympic experience? Just anything that kind of comes to mind?
Oh, this is a really funny story. One of the things that I found over the course of the Olympic experience, obviously there's a lot of pressure on stuff, but Jamie Korab was always really, really good at being able to smell the roses. Even though he was a young fella, he experienced the whole thing.
Because Brad is just laser focused. He seems like that. You mentioned he's got this.
Yeah. And he was more so then because he was younger. Jamie, this was a story about on the way over to get the medal. After we had won the gold medal, but before we got it. So we left the Olympic Village, and leaving the village to get to where the medal ceremony was taking place was basically, we are the terrorist target, and so we are being accompanied all the way through Torino to get to where we're going, and we're not going to stop So I won't even get into that whole story. It's fascinating, fabulous, and all the rest. But we eventually get ourselves to the point, this wild ride across Reno, and we get from the unsafe area, which is anywhere other than inside the safe area, inside where we are now on our way over to where the ceremony is taking place. And we're walking across this wide open courtyard that would be the size of about a soccer field and a half in length, all cobblestones. So as you're walking along, and the only ones in this whole area is us, the Canadian team and Jim Waite as part of that, and 1,000-year-old buildings on either side. And we're walking along and we're laughing, and, in the far corner, you can see where the lights are down there, where we're going to have the Olympic, where the whole ceremony is going to be taking place. And my cell phone rings. And the cell phone was from the Prime Minister's office, wanting to congratulate us. Could he talk to the team? I said, just a moment. And so they were getting the recently elected Stephen Harper to congratulate the squad, as we're in the midst of this surreal atmosphere here now, and cobblestones, 1,000-year-old buildings, and you're getting a call from the Prime Minister of your country to congratulate you. And so he comes on, just a moment, sir, and I handed on my cell phone to the pecking order of the team, which started with Brad. And of course, he was, I have to say, Prime Minister Harper was very nice to the boys. It wasn't just congratulations on to the next one. He spoke to them. So Brad had his turn. He's over there smiling. We're all looking at this, my God, thinking this is fantastic, wow, a wow moment, you represent your country, you're about to go get the gold medal. On the phone goes to Russ, talking to Russ, and it works its on way on down through everybody. So this went on for a while, and to Jamie. Now, so by then, all the other guys, they're kind of like focused in relation to those lights that are down there in the distance again, that's happening. And I'm standing up next to Jamie Korab, and he's got my cell phone up to his ears, and he got a big smile on his face. And he's there. I said, yes, Mr. Prime Minister. Well, thank you, sir. He said, thank you. He said, I really appreciate that. Tell me, he said, how are you making out in the new job? And I was in stitches. I mean, next thing the phone's in my hand, and I'm still laughing. What Jamie had to say. Only a Newfoundlander would ask.
He didn't necessarily have a response to
I
Jamie
don't know
now.
whether he did or not, but I'm sure that Prime Minister Harper probably still remembers it, because he was quite an avid curling fan. Eh?
There's a couple other questions I always like to ask. So one thing I love in this sport is the gamesmanship that goes on. We talked about some of the characters and sort of and you've mentioned you're a bit competitive, and sometimes people will push the envelope a little bit, or do, the simplest one is usually somebody likes to come along and do the hogline stare. Was there any stories it could be a game you were in? It doesn't even have to be that, but anything you remember that was something that was kind of funny or comical or were a little over the top, or just that over the years? It could be a club game, honestly. I love these. I just love these.
I'm filtering through my mind.
I know. And you never have to name names. That's the way we do this. Yeah.
There's lots and lots of. I remember. There was one I'll tell. I won't use names, but it was during the trials, and there was or the Brier leading up to the trials. So I won't be real specific. But it was one of those situations where I was coming down over the stairs, leaving the area where people were, down into the arena, down to the bowels of the arena, where the only people that are down there are the players and the ice technicians. Even the media are not allowed in that particular area. So I come down over the stairs. I'm at the time I smoked, so I was outside and I had a puff. So that's why I was part of my routine was I going to be the last one in. And as I'm walking around the stadium, down the bowels, I'm hearing clickety click, a team coming towards me in the other direction. And as I'm approaching this team, I said, "Good morning, gentlemen." And to a man, they walked right by me without acknowledging my presence. Now, I had been whistling just a few minutes before this. Mm-hmm. And as soon as I got beyond them, I was finding my blood pressure rising a little bit at this. And I said, "Oh, hang on now, Toby. You cannot allow somebody to interfere with you. This is not you. Move on." So I moseyed on. And I would have never been relating this story to you, but for the fact that the next morning, obviously, we're on the same schedule, and I come down over the stairs, much the same time, same situation, clickety click coming towards me, and I'm walking along, and I said, "Good morning, gentlemen," and they walked by me again. I got down. I went down. I continued the same way. And I'm making this story exactly length it was the third day. Same thing happened. And the third day, as I'm walking by, and I said, "Good morning, gentlemen." And as I got by the fourth guy, he looked over, "Good morning, Toby." And I continued on. So it was definitely one of those times when people are looking for an advantage over you. I wasn't intending on gaining the advantage. I didn't try to for any advantage. They became disadvantaged by virtue of the attitude that I took.
And see, this is where maybe as you aged and understood that if you give into it, you're just giving into it. And if you realize, then it actually might bounce back. That's what a lot of people have told me about that. Sometimes, like, the best way to deal with gamesmanship is just completely avoid it. And then it actually just ends up, in a lot of cases, sort of backfiring on the people that tried it, right?
Well, it's interesting when dealing with the young team here now. The boys are great. You know, they're all listening to your words and hopefully taking the right direction from them. And one of the things I talked to them about was like going out, and it's not quite as the same now because you're not really shaking hands with anyone before the game. But I said, don't be afraid when people are there, look them right in the eye and be yourself. And if whatever they do doesn't matter to you, really doesn't matter to you, just be yourself. And so that was fine. And one of my teammates, young Nathan Young, was telling me there last night that, you know, he did that, and one of the other competitors there, when he did it, he gave him a real nice wink, which is great
because he was being himself. That's
yeah.
Oh, that's
anyway,
nice.
It's there's lots of people do that stuff, but that's what I find now. What I do in terms of coaching is try to get people prepared for that.
Anything else we missed? Anything that
I got one real good Brad Gushue story, because we were talking about distractions. On the topic of distractions, we're playing Italy in Italy. No, excuse me, we're playing in Italy I can't even remember who it was that we were playing, but Brad was throwing a critical rock late in the game, and the sheet next to us, the Italians made a good shot. Well, a good shot in Italy was enough to bring the roof down to the extent that it actually hurt my ears. I mean, literally, you know, I love arenas and I love the sound, but it was so loud and shrill because it was filled with kids that it literally made my ears flinch. And Brad delivered and made the shot, and I made a mental note to say, mention it to him subsequently. And it was well later, like it was like that afternoon or whatever. And I said, oh, by the way, I said, I thought that was remarkable what you did there in terms of delivering that rock in the eighth end or whatever it was. He said, what do you mean? He literally did not hear it. So in terms of saying, is Brad a little bit different than anybody else? He's throwing a rock in the Olympics. The whole place goes wild to the extent of what I'm talking about, and he did not hear it with his concentration. That's the difference between an Olympic champion potentially and somebody that might have gotten frightened and missed it, you know? Yeah. I've probably got 1,000 others, but anyway, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
No, it has been. I've really enjoyed it, Toby, and you know, all the best for the young team and the development of Newfoundland curling, because Newfoundland and Labrador. I mean, it's a mouthful, but it's important to say that. And then great success, of course, with Brad, and you know, the future of curling looks bright, and that's exciting. Yeah,
it is.
Yeah, that's good. Well, this was a lot of fun.
Thank you very much. Thanks chatting with you. Okay, I got two quick ones.
Okay, well, there you go. Okay, quick one. Okay.
All right. Let it rip.
So a couple of quick ones. One of the things, obviously, as a lawyer, you try to do is use appropriate words and such. Whether you're a lawyer doesn't matter. Just using the appropriate words for the circumstance. And of course, in curling, one of the things you find as a coach is that you're trying to say is, you know, when you don't have the hammer, you're trying to force into one, and when you have the hammer, you're trying to score your two. Well, that kind of gets boring to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. So we're over at the Olympics, and fifth end break, all hands are there after all. I'm finishing up having my little say, and I reach in, and we're all reaching our knuckles into the middle now. Russ and Brad and all of us are knuckling in the middle. And I say, come on now, boys, get a brace. And all I am greeted with is puzzlement on everybody's face. Because in Newfoundland, a brace of rabbits means two.
Yeah.
So here am I'm being the inspirational leader trying to come up with a different way to say, I wasn't even trying to come up with a different way. It's just a word that I use all the time, meaning get two. And I can understand Russ not knowing what a brace was, but I have to say, Jamie Korab, from being out around the Bay, I would have assumed that for sure that he would have known what a brace was. But yeah, foreign language as a coach trying to tell it away.
So you're saying that Brad and Mark were it's
They
still a
didn't
new
know.
word?
Nobody heard it. It's an older Newfoundland. That's it. That's probably what it is. And the other funny one, in terms of circumstance, occurred when we were fortunate enough to win the Masters back in 2012, and Wayne Hamilton, who had been my adversary over the years, we got together later in our careers, and we go to the Brier in '98, and then we get together again, and we go to the Masters with Lloyd Powell and Paul Aiken, and we're in the final game against Stevenson from Quebec, having earlier on we played Ritzik in the semi, and we're in the final. And it's a critical situation in the end where we end up getting a 6, and the game is over after that. As my third man, Wayne, is sliding out of the hack, he had a nosebleed. And as he's sliding, he's got a good delivery, and so he was stretched out. And, of course, the drops were dropping on the ice. And so, we ended up then with a difficult situation for the other skip. And when they come down the ice, here's these blood drops coming out in the sliding path, right? So it had to be a technical timeout to address it, because you just couldn't. It was like none of us had ever seen anything like that before. And
I hope at first you're checking in on your teammate to see that he's doing okay, though. Like,
no, he made the shot.
That's what was important.
Oh, he made the shot. It was no problem. But anyway, so it turned out then it was kind of a bit of a delay that, interfered with the flow of the game and whatever. And subsequently, we ended up scoring the big end that ended the game. And you wonder whether or not that inadvertent whatever God happened.
Won by a nosebleed.
Was won by a nosebleed. There you go. Anyway, that's the last of it.